4 minutes after 10 is the time. A very good morning indeed to you. I'm going to leave that headline hanging. Make fewer arrests to help jail. The first paragraph of this story, it's a double take territory, isn't it? The police are being told to make fewer arrests because of the shortage of space in prisons. We will be digging into that after 11 o'clock this morning, and it is fair to say that I will probably need your help. But we begin, I think probably it's best to begin with an admission of ignorance. And it may be that the question I'm about to ask you is signally stupid, in which case I look forward to being educated by you. I look forward to you illuminating the issue of why. But there was something about the words of Simon Harris this morning, the Irish Taoiseach, as he and two other, well, all three leaders of the coalition government in Ireland held a press conference at government buildings in Dublin to announce that Ireland intends to officially recognise a Palestinian state. Norway and Spain have made an identical move today. 8 EU member states already recognise Palestinian statehood. I wonder whether you knew that. The most recent being Sweden in 2014. So it's fair to say, been somewhat stalled in recent years. And the potentially stupid thing I'm going to say is that the Irishness of Simon Harris seemed to me to be particularly pertinent to the point of being poignant this morning, because Ireland is a country, is an island that knows what it is like to have two parts of the same population committed to the destruction of each other. Two parts of the same people occupying more or less the same space under systems of partition, effectively, under armed borders over which it is difficult to cross. The island of Ireland, Irish politicians know what it is like to move towards the light and create a space in which the massive majority of those populations can live together in peace and harmony. So I wonder whether today is a day upon which to wonder whether Israel and Palestine can find a path that Unionists and Republicans in Ireland managed to find, culminating in the Good Friday Agreement. I don't know that stupid is fair. Perhaps I'm being horribly naive, but it certainly seems to me to be something that the countries now queuing up to recognise Palestinian statehood certainly believe and hope. I'm going to play you some words. I'm going to play you what Simon Harris was saying this morning, the Taoiseach. Also joined by the other leaders of the coalition government, all three of them, holding a press conference this morning in which they, you'll hear him describe it as an important and historic day for Ireland and for Palestine. And I'd probably ask you, at the end of this little clip, why it is an important day, why it is an important and historic day for Ireland and for Palestine. 7 minutes after 10 is the time, and here is the Irish Taoiseach Simon Harris speaking earlier this morning.
Today, Ireland, Norway and Spain are announcing that we recognise the state of Palestine. Each of us will now undertake whatever national steps are necessary to give effect to that decision. In the lead up to today's announcement, I've spoken with a number of other leaders and counterparts, and I'm confident that further countries will join us in taking this important step in the coming weeks. This is an historic and important day for Ireland and for Palestine. On the 21st of January 1919, Ireland asked the world to recognise our right to be an independent state. Our message to the free nations of the world was a plea for international recognition of our independence, emphasising our distinct national identity, our historical struggle, and our right to self-determination and justice. Today, we use the same language to support the recognition of Palestine as a state.
So 8 minutes after 10 is the time. The history of occupation in Ireland being something which Simon Harris feels is pertinent to today's recognition of statehood for Palestine. Of course, there'll be plenty of people pointing out to me that technically Northern Ireland is still occupied by the British, but anybody of anyone close to my age or older will know that today on the island of Ireland we see levels of peace and harmony that were unimaginable when I was born. I mean, having an apostrophe in your name was grounds for abuse in school when I was a kid. I mean, fairly ignorant abuse. You would also get into trouble for wearing glasses or having ginger hair. It wasn't a deep-rooted historical scar, but it was nonetheless there. And that is why when Simon Harris speaks directly to the people of Israel, I think his words are worth listening to.
Today, we are taking a significant political step. There will be reaction. There will be interpretations of its implications. But let us not lose sight of this fundamental truth. Children are innocent. The children of Israel, the children of Palestine, they deserve peace. It is long past time for a ceasefire, for the unconditional release of hostages, for unhindered access for humanitarian aid. There should be no further military incursion into Rafah. There should be no more Hamas or Hezbollah rockets fired at Israel. Civilians on all sides must be protected by international humanitarian law. Violence and hatred can only ever be a dead end. The only pathway to peace is political. The people of Palestine deserve a future filled with hope, a future defined by success instead of suffering, a future at peace. The people of Israel deserve the exact same thing. To the people of Israel, I say today, Ireland is resolute and unequivocal in fully recognising the state of Israel and Israel's right to exist securely and in peace with its neighbours. Let me be clear that Ireland condemns the barbaric massacre carried out by Hamas on the 7th of October last. Civilians attacked, murdered, hostages taken in the most brutal and terrifying of circumstances, including a young Israeli-Irish child. We call again for all hostages to be immediately returned to the arms of their loved ones. But let me also be clear, Hamas is not the Palestinian people. Today's decision to recognise Palestine is taken to help create a peaceful future. A two-state solution is the only way out of the generational cycles of violence, retaliation and resentment, where so many wrongs can never make a right.
And he is right, I think. A two-state solution is surely the only way out of the current impasse. And anybody upset or cross about the moves of Ireland, Spain and Norway this morning is being increasingly pushed towards a place where they will have to admit out loud that they are opposed to the two-state solution. Plenty of people, of course, in the Hamas leadership who are prepared to state that publicly. And one of the most unpleasant recent developments in Israel has been the number of people in Benjamin Netanyahu's cabinet who have been prepared to state that publicly. But what is the alternative? If not a two-state solution, then a continuation of where we are now. And where we are now is catastrophic. Carnage on an apocalyptic scale unfolding in Gaza since the October the 7th atrocity. And that is why today feels like, and quite a few of you are sharing this thought. Chris writes, crikey, that's a powerful and beautiful speech. JLB writes, Ireland is also a country that was invaded, occupied and annexed, James. They know of what they speak. Hazel says Ireland is qualified to comment, having suffered 800 years of tyranny imposed upon them by their nearest neighbour. Palestine existed before and is entitled to exist again. This is really nice. We in Ireland know what it's like, James. We grew up in the Troubles. Ireland is a wonderful country now. There are still a small few on both sides, perhaps even in Parliament, but you can hear the old hate in one or two MPs and in the South, but I much prefer my country at peace. So how significant is this? 0345 6060 973. I want you to feel welcome on the programme if you don't like this move. I can't see at the moment how you can articulate that unhappiness without articulating opposition to a two-state solution and where that leaves Palestinian people. I don't know. It would either involve another sort of Nakba, wouldn't it? Another mass relocation, or something worse. If there is not to be a two-state solution in that corner of the world, then what would the alternative look like? We know that Hamas has expressed a dedication to the destruction of Israel in its current form, and we know that Benjamin Netanyahu has campaigned upon a river to the sea platform as the leader of Likud. But I sense that, as in Ireland, the mood or the minds of the population can sometimes move further and faster than the minds and the moods of the leaderships. Can you see parallels with Ireland? 0345 6060973. I can, but it's possible I'm being a bit foolish or naive, in which case you usually relish the opportunity to set me straight. But the bigger question is, and whether you see it as a positive or a negative, I want you to tell me how significant you think this is, all right? Whether you see it and if you see it as a negative, you might have to work a little bit harder to explain to me why this shouldn't be welcomed by the international community, by Israelis and Palestinians alike, as a move towards a more peaceful future. But whether you see it as a positive or a negative, how significant is this? Because it feels like hair standing up on the back of your neck territory to me. For the people of Ireland or the leaders of Ireland to speak in those sort of terms suggests two things. It suggests a momentum is building that will be impossible to stop, and it suggests that Benjamin Netanyahu has got almost everything wrong. I mean, if you see his position as something that needs to be protected, it's now coming under attack from almost every corner. And I don't mean in Israel. I mean in the International Criminal Court in The Hague. I mean in the Spanish government, in the Norwegian government, in the Irish government. So how significant is it? 0345 6060973. And a slightly more difficult question, but does Ireland provide a template, if you like, or does Ireland provide an inspiration for a peace process in Palestine and Israel? If you hit the numbers now, you will get through. It's 10:15. 18 minutes after 10 is the time. This from Steve, who's in Kirkham, just I think sets the tone quite nicely. It's clear, James, that the current and long-standing status quo will not resolve Israel's and the Palestinians' problems. Once you treat people like equals, they will eventually turn their backs on terrorism, like the Irish. They just want to live a normal and peaceful life. Fingers crossed, eh? Jason's in Hastings. Jason, what would you like to say?
Hey, good morning there, James.
Hello there.
Hello there. I just wanted to say that there definitely, I think it's a positive step that Ireland specifically has recognised Palestine as a state, because how will we ever have a rapprochement unless they're treated as equals? It's impossible. It's like you can't have a situation where the Palestinians are considered to be some kind of unfixed, marauding ethnic tribe subject to the whims of a militarized state. That's impossible.
And the reason for Ireland's pertinence is that they, in some ways, show, I mean, although the situations are far from identical, they are similar enough for Ireland to be a sort of standard bearer for the process that the Middle East needs to go through.
Absolutely, yes, of course, in the sense that there is a blueprint there. But perhaps more importantly is the historical significance, because, of course, Balfour was the Secretary of Ireland where he instigated like the most...
Crikey, yes, blimey, good reach there, Jab. Nicely played, but blimey, it was complicated enough already, or at least sort of the comparisons were telling enough already, but I'd completely forgotten that.
But yes, James, I do think it needs mentioning, and I say this as an Irishman now. Of course, I'd be a plastic paddy, but I was born there. So I think that, Balfour's kind of like draconian rule of colonial Ireland, and then, of course, his involvement with Israel, the setting up of Israel. And then, of course, you have Churchill, who sent the Blackened Hands from Ireland to Palestine to subdue the Palestinian people and train the Zionist terrorist gangs there.
So the parallels are, I mean, A, probably not very widely understood by the average Brit, and B, profound and permanent, which is perhaps why Simon Harris spoke this morning with palpable emotion. What about the other side of the argument? The Irish lesson is that the more you treat people as equals, the more support terrorism loses, because it is contingent upon the perception of being treated as inferiors. So, Hamas's raison d'etre arguably dissolves in the way that the IRA does when people committed to a two-state solution or people committed to peace no longer feel like second-class, third-class or fourth-class citizens or prisoners, in their own homes. But if you are in Israel and you think that this is a step towards... chaos? A step towards more, towards less security? How do you reassure them, if you can?
Well, I just think they just need to reflect on, can we keep on violently oppressing these people and not expecting there to be consequences? Or do we at some point need to reach out as human to human and try to find peace by acknowledging their humanity? Because the further you oppress people, the more reaction you're going to get. It's just basic physics.
It is basic physics, except I suppose that the tightness of a lid can contain higher levels of pressure. I wonder whether that is the sort of Israeli view, for some people at least, is that we can contain this. We can actually keep a lid on it through what Jason chooses to describe as violent oppression, which is a description that fits. But if you set that alongside things like the Iron Dome and Israel's perceived capability of being able to defend itself against the myriad threats on its doorstep, I suppose that October the 7th is the moment that the lid blew off anybody trying to derive security or confidence from that analysis of the situation. The idea that you can contain the anger, the dispossession in territories like Gaza or the West Bank and not suffer danger, not suffer death, not suffer attacks because the containment is so complete. Something else, of course, that Netanyahu has to answer for. Thank you, Jason. Paul's in Wexford, land of my fathers. Paul, what would you like to say?
Well, I'd just like to say that, first of all, I think kind of as a nation, we're particularly proud of what took place this morning. And
forgive me for this, and forgive me for interrupting. Yes. I'll give you plenty of time to talk. But is it in Ireland? Is this a very big story? Is this a moment?
It is a very
okay.
big. It is a moment.
I thought it would be.
It's very much a moment, and I think it's been a long time coming.
Yes.
I mean, I'm 60 years of age, and I remember walking the streets of Dublin in pro-Palestinian marches back in the 70s and 80s. So it's a long time coming, and I think today we are, as a nation, very proud. And I think one of the things we hate to see is injustice, and I'm not just talking about injustice of the Palestinians; it's injustice for all.
Yes.
And I think it really is a unique. And
injustice also in a kind of colonial context, or in a
absolutely in that sort of
context of geographical schism. Is it naive to suggest that Ireland can show a way forward for a putative peace process?
I think we could lead that.
Yeah.
And I think as Irish people, I think we're very skilled at those kind of negotiations.
Talk to me a bit, if you would, about conflation, because there will be. I'm going to say desperate attempts, but I mean desperate almost in a sympathetic sense. There will be desperate attempts today to argue or to claim that Hamas and the Palestinian people are inseparable, that they are exactly the same thing, in much the same way that people once are. Well, that's why I mentioned being bullied at school for having an apostrophe in my name, because that meant I must be a supporter of IRA atrocities, which, of course, were visited mostly on this side of the sea. So, yes. I mean, that's one of the first things that needs to be undone, isn't it? The idea that the Palestinian people, whose statehood is being recognised, are synonymous with and identical to the terrorist leaders and the terrorist combatants who have undertaken atrocities like October the 7th.
But the Palestinian people are not Hamas.
You know that and I know that, but there will be a lot of people today. In fact, there's already...
The Irish people were not the IRA.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that, kind of oppression breeds oppression.
Yes.
And the only way out of oppression is to sit down and talk with your enemies and to find a kind of a common ground, a compromise. Nobody's ever going to get what they want, but we can get most of what, both sides can get some of what they want, and move forward from there, and reduce all those tensions, and reduce all that, and show people that living in peace and harmony is the way forward. There is no other way.
And that is a lesson that the Irish people are qualified to teach, even perhaps, as you suggest, to lead a process. It is 25 minutes after 10. Some people will, of course, disagree. Stephen is in Dublin. Harris's statement this morning is... Sorry, I must put my glasses on. That's quite a significant misread, isn't it? Harris's statement this morning is akin to rewarding terrorism. Stephen, I'm going to cautiously suggest that you've neither read it nor listened to it. He couldn't have been more explicit in his condemnation of terrorism and his explanation of peace. Unless, of course, and you're perfectly entitled to believe this, unless, of course, you think that the Good Friday Agreement was rewarding terrorism as well, in which case, with respect, you're just daft. Naz is in Enfield. Naz, what would you like to say?
I'd like to say it's a long time coming, but it's really given me hope that people can get speak talk to one another like they do in Ireland and Northern Ireland. And but I'm sad that Israel has already recalled 2 ambassadors back.
It's a very petulant behaviour, isn't it? But I guess that's the nature of the current government.
And it reminds me, because I'm 61. I grew up in the 70s where the IRA were bombing places in London, and as school children we weren't allowed to go on trips and things. And it of course it's not like Israel and Palestine. That's much more. It happens much more often, of course. But I think the recognising. All Ireland's saying is to recognise and have peace for both states. It's not, or Norway and Spain. They're not saying don't recognise Israel, and I find it quite wrong that the Palestinians have been for a long time not recognised. Like this country, it hasn't recognised.
Well, I think we'll be one of the last. I suspect the UK and the US will be. Did you know? And there's no embarrassment in not knowing, because I think it's a mark of how these issues are reported in the British media, that when Sweden became the first in Western Europe in 2014 to recognise a Palestinian state. They were joining 6 other European countries. Bulgaria, Cyprus, the Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland and Romania had already made that move. I didn't actually know that.
Nor did I.
So
we haven't heard anything.
You know, it's an interesting reflection of how what's the word I'm looking for? Distorted, I think, some of the coverage can be in this country.
Yes, and that's what's upsetting, because seeing both sides, I know of Palestinians who have been murdered, whole families and things. Of course, October the 7th. No one would have wanted October the 7th, but I just think that both they have to now speak to one another, and
that will involve leaders who had nothing to do with either the October the 7th terror attack, of course, or the 35,000 odd deaths that have occurred in consequence, in retaliation for that. Naz, thank you. What are the obstacles then? This is a genuine question. Just to open this, you can have the phone line that Naz is vacating. There's one other free at the moment. What are the obstacles to this? Who would say there is no point in talking? There is no path to peace? I know that Hamas would probably say that, although, those kind of characters are nothing if not opportunists. But who else, who on the other side, if you like, of the divide would say there is no path? I mean, I guess I'm wondering who can sit here today listening to these conversations, which are a mixture of emotional and very, very informed, particularly in the case of the first caller. The historical context that he brought to the table was better than anything you'll hear from the experts on the BBC. But to be listening to that and going, pie in the sky, never going to happen. What would those obstacles look like? 0345 60 973 is the number you need. And the time now at 10:30 means it is time for Thomas Watts to bring you the very latest headlines. It's 10:32 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Patrick in Belfast wants me to clarify a couple of things. I'm happy to, although I'm in my defence, Patrick. I don't think that we gave the impression, certainly Simon Harris's speech doesn't give the impression that anybody is describing the situation in Ireland as completely resolved. But you rightly remind us that this is the first year since before the Troubles that there hasn't been a paramilitary-linked death in Northern Ireland. And there have also, of course, been other high-profile events in recent years, perhaps most notably the murder of Lyra McKee and the Mashreen Barracks murders. So no one is suggesting that it is mission accomplished in Ireland, but equally I don't think anybody is suggesting that things aren't measurably or even immeasurably better than they were in the dog days of the Troubles. So how much inspiration can Ireland provide for the people of Palestine and Israel? Hugo Rifkind is a Times columnist and I find a very thoughtful contributor to public discourse, especially perhaps on matters Middle Eastern. And he's written a thread that I'm going to read in full because I think it's really interesting. He writes, "I'm of the view that every country should recognise a Palestinian state because it's meaningless to talk of a two-state solution without that." Hugo Rifkin's dad, of course, Malcolm Rifkin, was a conservative minister, and I think a refugee. I know that the family is Jewish, and I think sometimes that is pertinent to a public commentary. And he adds, although today will be a good test of how many people actually understand the politics and implications of that. The moment you do so, i.e. recognise a Palestinian state, for example, you distinguish a Palestinian state from the Israeli state. So stateless people cease to be stateless. And that means the narrative around occupation, apartheid, etc. fundamentally changes too. Implicitly, you're acknowledging that the Palestinian state would have borders, which means by definition the Israeli state would too. What then, he asks, of from the river to the sea, etc.? What of the idea of one binational state across the whole region? These become harder to advocate because you've just recognised an alternative situation. Personally, that's an alternative I'm all for, but it will be interesting to ponder how many people cheering today fully recognise what they're cheering for. So, I, to my embarrassment, I've forgotten the name of the Labour MP who was, I felt, very, very rashly and unnecessarily suspended for calling for all Palestinian and Israeli people to live together in harmony from the river to the sea. So that was a sort of notional one-state solution in which you would have equality of citizenship, equality before the law, full equality, full freedom of movement. And Rifkind is right to point out that under the recognition of the Palestinian state, that moves off the table in many ways, in all ways, perhaps in every way. Back to the phones. Cheryl's in Nottingham. Cheryl, what would you like to say?
Yes, hello.
Hello.
Thanks for taking my call.
You're most welcome.
I was a Salvation Army officer for 20 years.
Okay.
And as part of my training, I was sent to Belfast to do some training there.
Okay.
Residential training in a children's home.
Crikey.
In Belfast, we were opposite the Falls Road, which wasn't a very safe place to be. But I remember it was 22nd of July, 1972, this happened. I was told to cook the stew for dinner, which I was in the middle of doing, and the switchboard rang, because you didn't have phones in every room in those days.
No.
And it was the police, and they said, Madam, would you please take the usual evacuation procedures, because there's a £100 bomb at your back gate.
Oh, my days.
Fortunately, there was a building between the kitchen and in front of us, so we would have been safe from the blast.
Right.
But we had to evacuate the maternity area of the children's home. And so I ran through to the brigadier in charge and I told her the story. And she said, "Oh, don't be so stupid, cadet. You're only joking. This is nothing to laugh about." I said, "Brigadier, if you want to find out for yourself, you go to the switchboard and phone the police." And of course, the switchboard had a speakerphone.
I'm just going to nudge you a bit closer towards the conclusion of the story, if I may, Cheryl. There's an awful lot of people waiting to contribute. So
I'm sorry about this.
No, hey, don't you worry. I hope you don't feel I'm being too stentorious. But this is relevant to what's happened today, because.
Oh yes, because of the Spain and Norway and Ireland wanting to make two states.
Yes.
No, the two states.
So
yeah.
you're reminding us how bad it was in Ireland, and from that we can derive hope that no matter how bad it currently is in Gaza, it can get better when people speak to each other.
Exactly, yes. Because the IRA laid down their arms eventually with a compromise that the border between North and Southern Ireland was abolished, because they had military posts all along the border in those days.
They did. How often did you actually have to evacuate the children's home?
Just once.
Just the once.
Yes.
You wouldn't forget that in a hurry, would you?
No.
Was the stew all right? Was the stew all right?
It was Irish stew, actually.
Well, it would be, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Well, everybody lived anyway.
Well, that is a happy ending if ever there was one. Thank you, Cheryl. And a reminder, of course, that the old phrase, "Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good," be the enemy of the good, will always apply in the more complicated the situation. I think the more it even applies. Finbar O'Sullivan, which I'm going to cautiously conclude is an Irish name. Finbar O'Sullivan, that's fantastic. It's been in touch. So I'm very proud of my country today, James. Hopefully this can have an impact. Well, can it? Because, of course, the claim by Simon Harris, who has been working behind the scenes quite hard on this, I believe, the claim from Simon Harris this morning is that other countries will follow. And as we keep saying, referencing not so much the end of the Good Friday Agreement, which we're doing quite a lot today, or rather the introduction of the Good Friday Agreement, referencing the foundation of the Irish state. He adds, from our own history, we know what it means. Recognition is an act of powerful political and symbolic value. And that is the point, I think, of, the first point, the key point, the entry point of the Irish involvement. Patrick's in Reading. Patrick, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Finbar 100% is an Irish name, just to confirm that. But I'm very proud. I echo what you say. I'm very proud to be an Irish person today. I'm really glad we've done this. Your first or second caller said it's, and I agree to a certain extent, it's long overdue and it's a long time coming, but it isn't. I think you need to kind of navigate the political waters a little bit. Sometimes you have to wait and see and be able to say the thing when it's most opportune. I think this is definitely one of those days. So yeah, very proud.
I mean, that adds to the idea, doesn't it, that Netanyahu has possibly hastened that process. So I think you and I would possibly see it as inevitable. We would certainly see it as desirable. There are plenty of people in Israel and beyond, who, a couple popping up in my inbox, which I'll try and get to shortly, who aren't very happy with this development. If you can move beyond the deliberate and fraudulent conflation of Hamas with all Palestinian people, there may still be reasons not to be very happy with it. But Netanyahu has brought this on. Netanyahu's actions have hastened this process enormously, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, there are a lot of parallels between the Irish peace process and kind of what could happen in Israel/Palestine. I don't think there's direct copy and paste elements of it, but I mean, Netanyahu is 100%, I believe, exacerbated this situation to a point where people are kind of turning around and saying this can't go on. And also you can't have like Hugo Rifkin said, you can't have the recognition of a two-state solution or recognising the two states. And I think Ireland, as an example, is a two-state solution. As Cheryl said previously, you can't. I mean, it's literally one country and another. I mean, I desire that it's one country. I talk about it as being one, but it isn't in legality. But I think that's the journey that has to go on. I always reference this, and I've probably said it a million times before, but Patrick Keelty, I think, put it best, and he said there has to be concessions on both sides. There has to be furniture moves on both sides. Yes. And at this point, I just don't see there being a case or a situation where, say, a Palestinian state would concede and an Israeli state would match or recognise.
No, but a process has to have a beginning, doesn't it? And we get closer to that beginning. I mean, it's like, I don't know what the word is for the bit before the beginning. Is it an overture? I'm not sure, but there's a sense that the process of it beginning moves closer. And of course, when Keelty talks about moving furniture, what he doesn't mean is the Israeli government withdrawing ambassadors and bringing diplomats back to Israel because they're so cross at something as relatively straightforward as a simple recognition of a state. But yeah, the Irish stuff is profoundly pertinent. I think the more we talk about it, I'll pick this up from Mal because I think you need a bit of help. But the big difference in Ireland is that neither side wanted the total extinction of the other side, unlike Hamas, the governing side in Gaza, and unlike the Israeli minister who called for a nuclear bomb to be dropped on the Gaza Strip as well, Mal. So again, that doesn't work. And it also demonstrates a bit of ignorance regarding the Irish problem. They might not have wanted to eradicate every Irish-born person on the island, but there are strong periods of English history where the English government was dedicated to eradicating Irishness. It's why my name is different, for example, from Dara O'Brien's name, despite the fact that we come from the same clan. Mine is an anglicised version of that name, and it is a form of anglicisation that was imposed upon us from outside in the hope of completely eradicating Irishness from the country of Ireland, from the island of Ireland, however you prefer to describe it. So, I mean, look, by all means, keep them coming, but you're going to have a better grasp of the facts than I've got and my callers have got for any of these desperate attempts to turn today into a negative moment to land. But do please keep trying. 0345 60 973. There's always one. Seema, I beg your pardon. Amazing show, fantastic calls. But please, can JOB stop pronouncing hastened incorrectly? It's affecting my ability to listen with irrational anger. How am I pronouncing it? I don't even know that there are two ways to pronounce hastened. You hasten to... Haste, you haste... No? Honestly, Maybe someone will be able to help me out. I think I can pronounce the name of my next caller fairly uncontroversially. Dee is in Washington, D.C. Dee, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Well, first, as you can hear, I'm an American, and hearing the stories of people who've actually lived through the Troubles,
yes.
I want to be, mindful of that. But you asked, what would it look like if somebody wanted a total annihilation? And that's what it looks like to be an American. And look at Iran. What it looks like is that Iran is a rogue state, that it is still a state. And because it is a state, it can have sanctions levied against it. Corporations can be forbidden from working with it. It can be brought before the ICC. All of those things are only possible because Iran is an actual state.
Yes.
And so the idea that creating a Palestinian state is a reward, it's also the only way to achieve true accountability in a way that's valid to the international community for the atrocities against the Israelis.
That's a really good point. Well, I suppose the Hamas leaders have the request for arrest warrants for the Hamas leaders have been issued regardless of what you described this week. But the formal framework of international repercussions demands an international status.
Yes. I mean, again, an arrest warrant has been issued. Americans, we issued one for Osama bin Laden after 9/11, and we saw how that worked out. If there had been a state, an actual state that attacked us, there could have actually been some kind of means to identify who is at fault.
You have opened a box of worms there, Dee, haven't you? Because, of course, Israel is currently rejecting not just the jurisdiction of the ICC, which it's constitutionally entitled to do, but the very pertinence, the very purpose of the ICC. So although your optimistic analysis of what recognising statehood bestows upon the people governing a state or the people operating in the name of a state, Israel is simultaneously demonstrating that you can, with relative impunity from the American and the UK government, you can treat those supranational institutions with complete contempt.
Yes, and Israel should not think that they're a pioneer in that. I actually used
they're not.
to do.
But you've got North Korea and Russia and China ahead of them in the same sort of process as well.
Well, not even that. I mean, it wasn't until 2012, I believe, that the first state leader that was ever brought before the ICC was Laurent Gbagbo from Ivory Coast. They issued arrest warrants for many different atrocities, but the first time they actually brought somebody before the ICC was Gbagbo, and they dragged him out of a bunker. And you know what? The charges were dismissed in 2019.
I did not know that, and I should do. Can I ask you a much less serious question?
Yes.
How do you pronounce this word that is spelled Hasten?
Hasten, but I'm an American. So
Hasten with no T. There's no T in it.
Yes.
Is the T?
No. In a British English, you would say with the T. An American would say hasten, just like we say tomato.
So no T, because everyone's telling me that there's no T in the English. So I think I'm doing it correctly, and everyone else has fallen foul of an Americanism that has taken hold of this country like so many others over the last few years. Dee.
It's always a safe thing to assume.
Right, it is always thank you. It is always a safe thing to assume. I'll leave this hanging. Been accused of engagement farming. I'm not even sure what that is. 10:47 is the time. How has that happened? I'm 52 years old, and I've spent my entire life mispronouncing a relatively straightforward English word. It's not an American thing. It's not an American versus English thing or anything. I may have to double check that with one of those weird online pronunciation guides. But I apologise to Seema. I apologise profusely to Seema. I have been mispronouncing that word for my entire life, and I like to think of myself as something of a wordsmith, no less. I think I'm allowed to think of myself as a wordsmith. My book is currently enjoying its 23rd week in the Amazon Top 20. So, and number 2, of course, in the even more important Sunday Times. So have we got a guide now? Should we have a little? All right, here it is. It's official.
Hasten.
What?
Hasten.
Are you kidding me?
Hasten.
Well, there you live.
Hasten.
All right. Okay. You live and learn, don't you? Crikey. Susie's in St John's Wood to steer us back to rather more important matters. Widely welcomed the announcement today, Susie. What's your reaction?
Hi, hello. Lovely to speak to you.
Likewise.
First time.
Thank you.
Right. So I'm actually surprised how many people are happy with the decision. They probably mean it well, but my view is that it's extremely naive to think it actually means anything.
Okay.
And I explained to you, I'm obviously Jewish, and
you're not obviously Jewish, but you've told me now. So it's
no, that's true. But I'm probably biased. I'd like to believe I'm educated.
Of course.
So I want to come and objectively tell me my point of view. And the reason why I think it's naive is because Hamas doesn't deny the fact that it's in their chart. It's not about territory. It's not about, of course, oppression doesn't help, and we all want an end to the war, and we don't like to see anyone oppressed or living in a so-called open-air prison. But it is in their charter. They don't want a two-state solution themselves. There was
any more than Itamar Ben-Gvir does.
No, correct. But the problem is that we can't compare.
And he's,
it to
of course,
the IRA.
he's in the cabinet of the Israeli government.
He's quite extreme, correct. But I'm saying you can't compare to the IRA. They fought for a reason, and then you have someone to speak to negotiate. Here, they don't want to share it with the Jewish people. It's in their charter.
Because you're doing what Simon Harris cautioned everybody against, which is conflating Hamas with the Palestinian people. So negotiations as and when they occur would be very different from the Irish model, because you would have to go back to the Palestinian Authority or another body that would be able to negotiate with a mandate for the Palestinian people.
Thank you. That's what I'm trying to say.
I think everybody knows that. Certainly Simon Harris is going to know that, isn't he? And the Prime Minister of Norway and the Prime Minister of Spain are going to understand that, Susie.
Right. But I feel like the people who speak today on the LBC especially, they think, two-state solution, that's the only solution. It is not a solution until there's really, I think, an uprising from within Gaza and the Palestinians to get rid of Hamas and the charter. They've been brainwashed for years. Don't forget, when we say the Palestinians are not Hamas, I completely agree, and I would love to believe that they don't agree with Hamas. The problem is that they are being brainwashed from a young age in school that Jews are bad.
Like the settlers in the West Bank and elsewhere.
Sorry?
Like the settlers in the West Bank and elsewhere who I mean, under the guise of religion, have been brainwashed into believing that they've got the right to illegally occupy all of the territory.
The majority of Israel.
Well, I don't know that the majority, until you have a sort of free and fair election without the influence of Hamas in place, in the same way that many people tell me I can't trust the casualty figures coming out of Gaza because of Hamas's control. How on earth can you trust opinion polling or someone telling me that the massive majority of Palestinians are in favour of a one-state solution and the eradication of Israel?
But when you have a government body who is...
It's not really a government body, is it? It's an election from generations ago that was controlled by them.
But there's no other government body now there, so they are the government body of Gaza.
Which is why it's very important to remember that any peace processes and any peace negotiations would not be led by them.
Correct. That is a very good point. But I would like to add that the reason, again, why, going back to my point, why it's naive to think it might solve anything, is that we had fighting before the War of Independence. We're talking about the massacre of Hebron. We're talking about the uprising. It didn't start because there was a war that we had an independent state. So the problem is, it's a very actually depressing view that I have. And I don't.
Which is that containment is the best path for Israel.
I can't see a solution, but a two-state solution is not going to help, because we have to fundamentally get rid of a ideology.
Or there is an alternative, of course, and it's why conversations like this one are important. Because if we were to extend the Irish narrative further, or the Irish comparison further, and I'm not sure, A, that this is possible, or B, that it would be countenanced by the international community. I'm pretty sure it wouldn't be by Israel. But the Irish peace process was preceded by a laying down of arms by a previously prescribed terrorist organisation. Neither of us are acknowledging that possibility, of course. Yeah,
but let's go back to the basics. The IRA was fighting here. I do believe
the IRA was fighting for freedom and autonomy.
but maybe it's my Jewishness coming out here, is that I do believe they do want to kill and get rid of the Jewish people in general, nothing to do with a territory. And that's how I can't compare the IRA with what's going on in Israel.
You know that in its
solution.
You know that originally the Irish problem was religious. It was Catholic versus Protestant.
I don't think they're just every person they want to kill on the street. Whereas I do believe that the indoctrinated the Hamas people, they would relish on whatever Jew they see and they can get their hands on, they would kill. That is the fundamental problem. And I don't speak about the Palestinians. I speak about Hamas.
And that is, thank you. I'm glad you were listening today, and I'm glad that you've called in, because I think it's right to have a corrective on some of the optimism that has been articulated today. And I think Hugo Rifkind actually, although he's in favour of a two-state solution, he urges similar caution in being fully aware of exactly what is ushered in by the recognition of Palestinian statehood. Thank you, Susie. It's important to keep these lines of communication open. And of course, I suppose you use the word depressing yourself, the most depressing thing about your analysis is that you say yourself, I don't think this will work, but I don't know what will, which is almost the definition of diplomacy, isn't it? Thank you. This is nice from Stephen, who's in Milton. He says, are you okay, mate? It's a nice message. I think he's probably worried about my ego being bruised by Hasengate. He goes, James, are you okay, mate? You've been talking about Ireland all morning. You've spoken to some Irish callers, and you haven't once used the word grand. Are you poorly? Should we be worried? Apart from the fella in Wexford, who didn't ask me how I was, remember? And I haven't heard any kind of absolutely central casting Irish accents this morning. It's normally an Irish accent straight out of central casting asking me how I am that prompts me to respond with the word grand, which is not a word I ever use in any other context. When anybody else ever asks me how I am, but if someone with a strong Irish accent says, how are you, James? I go, I'm grand. I don't add so I am, because that would be silly, but I say I'm grand. And do you know where else it happens? It happens on Gmail. Once you get to Ireland, it starts predicting the word grand in your texts. 3 minutes after 11 is the time. I think Sheila talked about it yesterday, but it has not received anything like the attention that you might expect in a normal country. But the attempts to curb our right to protest, one of our most fundamental freedoms currently being undertaken by the government, suffered something of a setback yesterday. We'll find out more about that after 12:30 today. Of course, at 12 o'clock it is PMQs, which I have a very love-hate relationship with PMQs. Actually, that's not quite the right word. I have quite a nuanced relationship with PMQs. I'm not required. Do you mind if I just check something with the producer before I continue? Am I required to cover PMQs? I've never actually... If I change my mind... No, but if I change my mind, would we be okay? Or would it... How far upstairs would that have to go, do you think? Is that... No, I'm pretty cool. I'm pretty confident if I wanted to ditch PMQs, I could. But I've always rather enjoyed it. And then I didn't for a while. And then I did again. So it's an odd one, PMQs, for me. But I have to tell you that in recent weeks, I have been very surprised to find myself actively looking forward to it. Not just, of course, to Natasha Clark's company, but also to the sense of jeopardy that's being introduced to PMQs now. The way in which the dynamics have changed. Keir Starmer, essentially, portrayed by Rishi Sunak as almost the leader rather than the opposition. It's a really interesting period of British politics that comes to a head during PMQs. And then, of course, unfortunately, you have the distractions of Neanderthals like Jonathan Gullis sort of bellowing in the background for reasons that even he would probably struggle to explain. But anyway, PMQ's with us at 12. And then a couple of guests who will be able to talk us through a couple of stories that I felt deserved a little bit more attention. Here's a story that deserves a little bit more attention. Thomas just picked it up in the bulletin there. The number of people applying for a special health and care visa to come to this country and work in the arena of health and social care has plummeted. It's a deliberate political move, this. And I think we'll take a moment to talk about it. Because once you allow xenophobia or racism to inform your policies on immigration, then you lose control not only of the narrative, but you lose control really of reality. If you talk about numbers as needing to come down, which is a reasonable position to adopt. There is nothing racist or necessarily xenophobic about that, as long as you can answer the next question, which is why must they, and what will be the negative consequences of that. But as soon as you talk about numbers needing to come down, particularly numbers which everybody today seems to have forgotten, exploded in part because of the war in Ukraine and the exodus of British Hong Kong British people from Hong Kong to this country. But if you prioritise a reduction in numbers without going into any further detail, and if, God forbid, you were to use the images of desperate people in dinghies washing up on the Kent coast, usually, thank God, alive, but not always, coming out of those waterways with their lives intact, if you were to somehow successfully conflate those images, and the racist rhetoric that often accompanies those images, the claim that all of these people wish us harm, or that they're all, terrorists or paedophiles, or whatever the lie du jour may be for the sort of racist element of public discourse, which is, of course, louder and bigger than it's been at any point in my lifetime, since the heyday of the National Front in the 1970s, which I'm too young properly to remember. But if you allow that idea of, we've got to get the numbers down, and this is the crucial bit, nothing else matters, then you really move into stupid territory, stupid and dangerous territory. We've got to get the numbers down, and nothing else matters, because what that means is that you might end up getting rid of or preventing the ingress of people who we need and want. That's the really, really weird thing. The number of health and care worker visa applications are down 76% this year. 76%. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, that's all right, James. Last time I went to visit Nan in a care home, they had staff falling out the windows. They had 10 staff for every... They haven't had a vacancy since 1992. Last time I was in hospital, do you know, last time I tried to get a GP's appointment, goodness me, they offered me 33. They offered me... They was so easy to get an appointment at the GP's. They offered me one yesterday. They said, could you come back yesterday? I said, yes, I could. I'll be with you at 2:30. I tried to go to hospital today. I got there. Honestly, it was like arriving at the Ritz. We're so pleased. I don't think they'd seen a patient at my local hospital for about 2 years. There were so many staff just sitting there twiddling. I went to A&E the other day. Goodness me. Do you know, at A&E, at my local hospital, they've actually brought in entertainers and buskers to try and tempt more people in, because they've got so many staff and so few patients that they're just twiddling their thumbs all the time and playing Tetris. It was incredible. I only went in by accident. I thought it was a theatre. So I wandered into the A&E department. How can we help you, sir? I said, well, there's nothing actually wrong with me. And they said, are you sure, sir? Any aches and pains, sir? Anything we can have a look at, sir? Suits you, sir? They said, so one thing upon which we can all agree is that the health and social care sectors in this country have got staff coming out of their ears. Every single time I open the phone lines on questions of GPs' waiting lists, the state of A&E, the morale of the NHS, the staffing of hospital wards, the experiences of mothers giving birth. Every single time I open up the phone lines, you know what happens, don't you? I am bombarded with people telling me that they've got more staff than they know what to do with in the health and social care sector at the moment. And you know why they're free to phone me? You know why so many people can phone me about the plethora, the abundance of staff in the health and social care sector? It's because they've got nothing else to do. They've got no patients to treat. They've got no mothers to look after. They've got no diseases to cure. Oh, man alive, if we can all agree about anything, then we can agree about the fact that the NHS is not remotely short of staff. And therefore, news that there's been a 76% drop in people keen to come here to help is fantastic news. Well done, everybody. Well done, everybody. I grant you, if you tuned in just sort of in the middle of that or shortly after it began, as Dan is pointing out in a text, that may have sounded a little odd. I need a sarcasm emoji. There's no way we can have a sort of... As being sarcastic, nobody thinks that there is too much staff in the NHS. Nobody thinks that the social care sector is oversubscribed with willing and qualified staff. Literally nobody believes that it is good news that our
applications, the number of applications to come to the UK on a health and care skilled worker visa has gone down by 76%. Well, is that true? I haven't actually seen, and it's something I'll check with Natasha when she joins me to talk about PMQs shortly before 12 o'clock. But are they doing a lap of honour? Are they doing a lap of honour? Are they claiming a win? What do we want? Fewer nurses. When do we want them? Now, please. Are they doing a lap of honour on this? I know that Mel Stride is due to give a speech later today, essentially telling people that, telling employers that they should prioritise British people over, I suppose, better qualified people who happen not to have been born here. We talked about this yesterday. Mel Stride's weird and irrational hatred of anybody foreign with a job and anybody British who can't work. He seems to despise them in almost equal measure. But the 12,400 applications made in the first 3 months of this year is down by 76% on the first 3 months of last year. Sorry, there you go, Andy. Can you please do numbers rather than percentages? Percentages are meaningless. Okay, there's the numbers. So there were 12,400 applications in the first 3 months of this year, and last year in the same period there were 51,000, give or take. And that is what happens when you decide that the priority is to reduce the numbers. Of course, the numbers in the context of immigration being in the region of 750,000 a year are negligible in this sector, but they have successfully dissuaded health and care workers from coming to this country. Health and care workers who history suggests would otherwise have been minded to come to this country and look after us, look after our elderly, look after our vulnerable, look after our sick, are now being successfully dissuaded by deliberate government policy from coming here. That's quite incredible. Until you remember who's in charge and how desperate and pathetic they are. Which brings us to Mel Stride. Businesses looking for new staff will have to put British workers first under non-negotiable curbs on migrant labour. The language is just hideous. It continues to be hideous. Yesterday we looked at what this would mean in terms of employers. Today I just want to do something that we do every few months and haven't done for a while. I touched on it yesterday. I gave you a warning that we were going to do it. I'm quite middle class, don't you? It's not a big shock to anybody. But it doesn't mean, as some people sometimes seem to think, it doesn't mean that you move in circles where foreign-born people are less represented. I mean, I know doctors, I know veterinary surgeons, I know city workers, I know one Citibanker, one of them's gone actually as a consequence of Brexit. But I know an awful lot of people in my demographic who are expats from other countries, or migrants as Mel Stride would call them. And I know, I've been certainly from my children's schools, both in the state and the private sector, the representation of either children who have come here from elsewhere themselves or children who have parents who have come here from elsewhere is very large. I mean, it's largely because I live in London, isn't it? I live in the most sort of multicultural and cosmopolitan city in the country. But I've been on the road a lot lately, and it is not a unique experience, is it, to see different cultures, different ethnicities represented almost everywhere you go. And yet I never really stop to think about what it's like to be a migrant worker. You may not even think you're a migrant worker. I go to my GP. Does she think she's a migrant worker, do you think? I've never asked her. I mean, I wouldn't. How would you even start that conversation? Do you think Mel Stride does? He goes to the doctors, hands over his sample and says, by the way, where were you born? And she says, I was born in Karachi or I was born in Cologne. And he says, oh, so you're one of those migrant workers, are you? Oh, yes, we don't really want you here. We're hoping to replace you with somebody British at the first opportunity. And she goes, oh, okay, well, we'll give you a ring next week with your test results. Actually, no, we'll give you a ring tomorrow because we have got so much time on our hands in the NHS. The last thing we need is extra staff coming here from anywhere else. Sarcasm emoji. I want to know what it's like. And the reason I mention my class is probably because of a bit of
ignorance on my part, even maybe a bit of shame, guilt. I don't know. I'm Catholic, so I have to be careful with the guilt and the shame. What's it like? Do you hear? Do they mean you? 0345 606 0973. I'm going to set the bar very, very, very low on this. To contribute to this programme, all you need to have done is to have been born somewhere not in the United Kingdom. All right? Because Mel Stride is pretty clear here that we're British first. We recruit the British first. And I find that almost inconceivably disgusting when you spare even the most cursory thought for the men and women who keep our country afloat. The idea that that cohort does not include huge numbers of people who were born somewhere else, who are being told now by Mel Stride that we only really took you on sufferance, or we didn't really want you. So I have no idea I mentioned in the first hour that I've got an apostrophe in my name. So as a tiny kid, as a 10-year-old, when the IRA were doing their worst, I was on the receiving end of what could be loosely described as a bit of racism at school. I had a head teacher who always used to make the Irish boys empty out the slops bucket in the kitchen. My poor old parents were paying him thousands of pounds a year for that particular. So O'Mahony, O'Reilly, O'Brien, Keogh, we were always particularly singled out for abuse from that by that man. Looking back, I didn't know it was racism at the time. I guess it was. But I'm not one of those people who's got a slightly foreign name and therefore claims that he understands what racism is. It's a truly ridiculous point to make. And similarly, I don't really have any understanding of the immigrant experience. Technically, I don't know what I am, actually, technically, because I was adopted from a biological mother who was Irish but came here literally to give birth and then went back to Ireland. I was adopted by a British couple, one of whom had Irish heritage and one of whom did not. So I don't know what I am. But I know what I'm not. I'm not one of the people that Mel Stride is talking about. I'm not a migrant worker under any definition of what those words may mean. But do you know who was a migrant worker when he was in number 10 Downing Street? Technically, Boris Johnson was a migrant worker. Jeremy Hunt, I believe, is married to a migrant worker. Rishi Sunak is married to a migrant worker. Both of Rishi Sunak's parents were migrant workers. So who's Mel Stride talking about? If he's not talking about them. That's the problem with politics and rhetoric that is designed to reduce numbers without looking at who it is that you are telling is not welcome. 76% drop, tens of thousands of people who could today be working in our NHS and our social care sector are not, because of people like Mel Stride, because of policies designed to make this country less attractive to people who we obviously need. It's mad, isn't it? So, I just want to know what it's like. I want to know whether there has been a point in the last few years where you sort of went, crikey, they'll be coming after me next. What is a migrant worker? 0345 606 0973. What is it like to be a hard-working, foreign-born member of this community? What is it like to be a hard-working, foreign-born member of this society? To be now every single day being told by this government that people like you are not welcome. That's what I want to know. Because I don't think you get asked this question, and I can't imagine that you're comfortable necessarily volunteering the information unasked. So here is me asking you, as someone who was not born here, brackets, so what, close brackets, hearing from the government to whom you pay your taxes, every single day, you are essentially being told that we didn't really want you here after all. Or maybe you're not hearing that, in which case you're even more welcome to ring in. 0345 606 0973. What does this toxic rhetoric around, quotes, migrant workers, end quotes, mean to you? And how does it make you feel? It's 20 minutes after 11. It is 23 minutes after 11. Make of this what you will, all right? But the
people who would ordinarily be pretty quick to poo-poo such rumours are not poo-pooing rumours that Rishi Sunak is poised to call a general election later today for July the 4th. Tim Shipman of the Sunday Times, and the splendid author, was on with Nick not long ago to talk about his new book. He puts it best when he just says, this feels different. Normally very quick to dismiss this, and people in the loop, people he can call to say, this is all nonsense, isn't it? And they'll say, yes, it is. He reports that those people, the people who would normally pour cold water on precisely this sort of febrile speculation and rumour mongering, they are staying silent. That nobody who you would ordinarily expect to scotch these rumours is currently scotching these rumours. However, I hasten to add, did you see what I did there? I hasten to add that's not coming naturally to me. I hasten to add that in the event of anyone scotching these rumours, I will bring you that information toot sweet. 24 after 11 is the time. The government is dedicated to telling migrant workers that they are not welcome here. Oh, man, I just did a 20-minute introduction when I've just come up with a single sentence, which... It's 10 times better than my introduction. Okay, here it is. Ready? The government is completely dedicated to telling, quotes, migrant workers, end quotes, that they're not welcome here. How does that feel if you're already here? 03456060973. Ike's in Lincoln. Ike, what would you like to say?
Oh, hiya.
Hello.
I'm a GP down in Lincoln Way. I've been in the country.
But you're not busy, are you? The last thing we need is more doctors, Ike. We've got them coming out of our ears in this country at the moment.
I'm actually doing home visits to the elderly today. That's why I do it on a Wednesday.
Gosh, thank you.
So I see elderly people. So, yeah, it's quite scary when I listen to this rhetoric. I've been in the country 15 years. I've worked since when I was a student. I paid taxes. I feel British. I've got a British passport. I'm married to a British woman. When you start to hear that there's the chance that they're going to start taking things away from us, could they say we're migrant workers? Will they take our passports away?
Well, that's not. No one's saying that. Well, I mean, no one is saying that. No, and I think given the list of things that you've just established, although you are a migrant worker under many definitions, I don't think you would be somebody that. Well, you wouldn't be under any threat today, but Mel Stride, if he could turn the clock back 15 years, he wouldn't want you to come here. That's what I'm interested in, the emotional impact of that sort of rhetoric, rather necessarily than the technical impact.
Okay, that's fine. But, yeah, the rhetoric is not a good one because it just discourages people. It makes you sometimes question, are you really British? Are you really welcome? If things go wrong, are people going to turn around and say, yes, let's sack all the migrant doctors and give jobs to English doctors? So it's not what we want to be hearing whilst we're our best at the front lines.
Well, I mean, you are ringing me while doing house calls for elderly patients in Lincoln, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And Mel Stride is presumably celebrating a 76% drop in people applying from overseas for visas to come and work in health and care. I mean, it's actually incredible, isn't it? A brief word, if you would, on my sarcasm earlier, Ike. How overstaffed is the NHS at the moment, in your opinion?
Overstaffed. We've been trying to recruit a salary GP for over a year in our practice, and the one we finally got, guess what, is a migrant worker who we have to sponsor his visa. So you can see.
It's like there's two universes. There's the one in which the Conservative Party is assembling policies, and then there's the one in which we all live. And I tell you what breaks my heart, and I hesitate to say this to you, but you just said two things, and I sometimes wonder, who is Mel Stride and James Cleverly and Rishi Sunak? Who are they trying to appeal to with this sort of politics? Yeah. And the questions you just said is, people will be saying, are you really British? And you'll be wondering, are you really British and are you really welcome? I can't help worrying that the people that these politicians are appealing to are the people who would answer no to both of those questions,
Exactly. I think that's the trend now. It's election time now, so they're trying to garner votes from. Is that the right? I never know which one it is. Is that the right or the left?
That's the right. That's the right. It certainly is the right of the right. Ike, thank you. I shall keep you from your house calls no longer, but I can't think of a more pertinent first call on a subject about how you as a migrant worker feel when senior politicians
repeat endlessly that migrant workers are not welcome. So there you go. Look, I'm going to labour this point slightly because it's what I do. 76% drop. So the numbers, for people who prefer figures to percentages, have gone from 50,900 in the first 3 months of last year to 12,400. Now, that's everybody applying for a health and care skilled worker visa. That includes the GP that Ike's practice have managed to take on after a year of advertising, who is somebody here on a health and care skilled worker visa. It's incredible. The first call we take on this, someone who couldn't be living deeper into the story that we're discussing. And how does he feel? Well, he feels like asking whether he's really British at all, despite 15 years working here, man and boy, or at least doctor and student, tax-paying, British wife, British passport. And he's wondering, am I really welcome? To which Mel Stride would say, well, no, you're not. Or he'd say, oh, no, I don't mean you. I mean Ike 2.0. I mean the Ike who's thinking of getting on a plane from Lagos today, not the Ike who got on a plane from Lagos 15 years ago. And then you say, well, why is that? What's the difference? To which Mel Stride would presumably respond by saying, well, we don't need more doctors now. We've got them coming out of our ears. To which Ike would respond by saying, but we've just been advertising for a year for a doctor, and the only one we could find was someone who had to come here on one of those visas that you've just presided over a 76% drop. No? Do you see what I mean now? You see how mad it is? When you prioritise reducing numbers over explaining what it is that you're doing? And who is Mel Stride appealing to? People who don't think that Ike should be here. People who don't think that Ike should be made welcome. And of course, if they don't think that Ike should be here, then they don't think that James Cleverly's mum should be here. They don't think that Rishi Sunak's wife should be here. That's the bit I can't get my head around, politically or ethically, never mind intellectually. Although in the case of Mel Stride and James Cleverly, expecting any form of intellectual understanding is probably a little ambitious. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. 33 minutes after 11 is the time. The government returns once again to the rhetoric of the migrant worker. You, if you are one, potentially are not welcome here. Businesses looking for new staff will have to put British workers first under non-negotiable curbs on migrant labour, Mel Stride told the Daily Mail yesterday. And I am wondering how that feels if you are already here. 0345 6060 973. Just a quick word on that. On those building rumours of a potentially. I don't normally. And listen, I'm a seagull on days like today. I'm categorically not a trawler. I am every inch a seagull. But the former political editor of the Sunday Times is normally a very sober voice on such matters. Now, the chief political commentator, of course, and the author of a quartet of Brexit-related books, Tim Shipman, writes, once again, there are snap election rumours. I have been a sceptic every time so far. More importantly, people I trust who are in the loop have told me it's nonsense. This time, those people are silent. And he adds, it may still be nonsense, but it feels different. So just giving you a heads up, that's all. Don't, if you work in this line of business, it's quite helpful to know because then you can book your holidays and do things like that accordingly. Normally, when I go on holiday, an enormously significant political event occurs, but at least with general elections, you get at least 6 weeks warning. Andre's in Tottenham. Andre, what made you pick up the phone on this migrant worker story? This is the latest clampdown on migrant workers.
Hiya. Yeah, so I just wanted to pick up the phone. I work in international recruitment. I've recruited radiographers and nurses from overseas for the last 5 years. And, initially they're very excited to come to the UK. They're very excited, happy to offer their services.
Yes.
And it's something I've always kind of envied them a little bit. I'm like, oh gosh, I wish I could do that. Just go to another country and start a new life. It's really brave thing to do, to leave your family, your loved ones, your support network, and to come to a new country. And when they've got here, they haven't always been welcomed. And I've recruited into some like major cities like London, Croydon, and then some rural areas like in South Wales and like Merthyr Tydfil.
Yes.
So different demographics, and these people have come from different areas, sometimes India, sometimes Africa, different countries in Africa, the Middle East as well. And these people have come over, and when they've got here, it's been a cold reception towards them from the other nurses. The staff involved in the recruitment have always been lovely towards them, but the other nurses on the wards have kind of shown them a cold shoulder. And this could be for a number of reasons. It could be the availability to pick up extra shifts has gone down now because they've got adequate staffing. It could mean that means that agency staffs are going to be reduced because they've got new staffing and they don't need to spend more on agency staff. So those overseas nurses or overseas workers sometimes, even helping the service, they get treated in a way like, oh, you're taking something away from me.
Good grief. I mean, I'd never thought of it that way around before. But, of course, the process you describe is going to be costing the health authority or the health trust a heck of a lot more than what was happening before these recruits arrived. Because the agency wage bill would be much higher than it would be for a staff member.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it would be.
How's business otherwise? Have you noticed? Because there's been a 76% drop in the first 3 months of this year compared to the first 3 months of last year in precisely the sort of people that you're seeking to recruit, I think, if I've understood your job correctly.
Yeah, so it's the requirement. It's like almost like the funding's gone. The interest is still there, but the money to fund and complete these projects aren't there. And, I don't want to be like a rumour spreader, but through the grapevine, I've kind of heard, we've been told to kind of hold off for the next kind of 6 months.
Not to hire anyone?
Just slow it down. Not to hire anyone, to put things on pause for a little bit.
Well, you can't hire anyone if there's nobody there. It's chicken and egg, isn't it? If you've got, if there were 55,700 jobs, I beg your pardon, 59,300 jobs in the first 3 months of last year. 50. I'll get there in the end, Andre. Bear with me. 50,900 applications in the first 3 months of last year. That means there was just shy of 51,000 potential jobs being filled. The jobs haven't been filled by the first 3 months of this year. There are just now only 12,500 people applying for them. So by definition, 40,000 jobs are going to be empty. Or they're going to be filled with these mythical British people who no doubt are constantly beating a path to your door. All these unemployed doctors and nurses and care workers who are desperate for a break but just can't get one for love or money.
So those applications once the candidates, the workers, the interested people would be granted a sponsorship. Is that the figure of the number of sponsorships given?
Yes, these are the visas. I think sponsorship is a requirement of the visa, isn't it?
Yeah. So they have to get sponsored first before they get their visa. It kind of would make sense. I mean, they take away the kind of reduce the number of people's families who come over on a care visa.
Yeah, no, that's what they're doing.
They've made it really unattractive for staff coming from overseas.
Which would be fine if the health and care sectors were brimming at the bursting at the seams with staff, but they're not.
Yeah, we didn't need them. Yeah,
it's incredible. I mean, the circularity of it never ceases to stagger me, Andre. And yet, I don't know yet whether they are doing a lap of honour. Maybe Rishi Sunak will stand up today and say we've decided to call a general election because we have reduced the number of people coming here to work in health and social care by 76% in the first 3 months of this year. So now is the time for celebrate. And you just go there. When is the last time anybody visited a care home and thought, you know what they've got too much of? Staff. Or a hospital. The last time you went to a hospital, I thought, crikey, I can't believe how many staff they've got. Monica's in Bexley. Monica, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, Monica.
And it's a great privilege to speak to you.
Don't be ridiculous. I hope it's a pleasure. I hope it's a pleasure, but it's certainly not a privilege, Monica.
It is. I've wanted to phone in because I am an immigrant.
Right.
I was born in Zambia and grew up in Zimbabwe, and I moved over here when I was 45 years old. So that makes me a migrant.
Yes.
And I got in and I worked from the first week I got in. I didn't want to be a burden on anybody. And I've been in the teaching profession ever since, and I just retired last year. And you know what makes me angry is that I am a migrant. But because I'm a migrant worker, but because I'm a white migrant worker, I have never experienced any of this. I'm afraid to say it is racist if the migrant is of a darker hue than a white person, they get a tough time. And you know what is ironic is that I've got friends over here who are also migrants from Zimbabwe, white Zimbabweans, who get all enraged about how these boats are coming over and these migrants. And I say to them, but we are migrants.
And they say, but we are legal. We are legal migrants.
Yeah, well, I am legal.
I know you are, but that's who Mel Strider's talking about. Do you know what else is ironic, of course? Because I think you're right. But what else is ironic? These are precisely the people who told us we had to leave the European Union because there were too many white people coming here to work from other countries. So it's not quite, forgive my...
Oh, okay.
It's not quite as black and white as you and I are allowing.
Yeah.
Because that failed.
Yeah. But I mean, I've been teaching, and I know this is a subject about the doctors and nurses, and quite rightly so, because of the present figures that have come out today. But teaching is in crisis. Yes. And I am still going in a couple of days a week doing cover work. Good. I'm doing cover work because
they haven't got the bodies.
They haven't got the bodies. The teachers that are there are being given different subjects to cover. They are being worked much harder. Where before we used to have so many non-contact lessons a week, that's been limited. And the pressure on the teaching profession is enormous. I came in and I got a job within my first month in January of 2003 because the school was desperate for a teacher. Desperate.
Yeah.
And they employed me within a week without even watching me teach, just an interview. And yes, can you start on Monday?
Well, they were lucky to get you.
There ever since.
They were lucky to get you. And they're lucky that you're still prepared to do a couple of days a week to fill holes that Mel Strider's determined apparently to make bigger. I don't know about teaching, but he's also talking about training up ex-convicts to work in areas such as hospitality. So,
oh my word. Okay.
Well, I've got no beef with that. They already do it. I went to a restaurant. I can't remember what prison it was at, but the restaurant was called The Clink, and it literally trained up ex-convicts to take up roles in hospitality. It is lovely, but it's not a government. It's not a government policy.
No.
We're going to plug. How are you going to plug this enormous hole? Prisoners. That's the point at which even supporters of Mel Strider, or people who share his view of people like Monica of foreign workers. That's the point at which you go, really, mate? We've got prisoners? What about the nursing? Prisoners. Teaching? Prisoners. Okay. Manufacturing? Prisoners. I'll read this from Paul. I always like texts that open with a mild insult. He writes, "You live in a bubble. You've no idea. I'm a mythical British worker who cannot secure a contract in my country to support my family because agencies are throwing Eastern European drivers at the company I work for. It's very easy for you. Hang on, I thought you didn't have a job. Oh, you haven't got a contract, but you've got a job. It's very easy for you to sit in your warm studio. I think you'll find that I turn the air conditioning down quite low before Sheila Fogarty gets here, Paul. But, facts matter. Commenting on something you clearly have no idea about. Get down from your privileged ivory tower." I don't know what you're talking about. But I do know what I'm talking about, Paul. I hope that's a helpful distinction. And I don't know what sort of driving you do. But the scheme that Mel Strider is introducing today, it is hoped, will repeat the success of a 2021 scheme to plug a gap in the numbers of HGV drivers. So if that's the kind of driving that you're doing and you think the situation is currently disastrous, then the bloke you need to be picking a fight with is the bloke saying that it's been an enormous success, so we're now going to introduce it to lots of other sectors. I genuinely hope that helps, and I hope you get a contract. But if you're not getting one, it's not for the reasons that you think it's for. And if it is, then the person you should be blaming is the bloke who is in charge of business. And today he is promising to extend the scheme from your sector into other schemes. So anyway, I can only explain it twice. 11:48 is the time. There's lots of clinks, apparently. Lots of restaurants in prisons where they train up prisoners. So everyone's getting in touch to tell me where I was. And I wasn't at half the ones you're talking about. I certainly wasn't at Brixton Prison. I wasn't at Star. But Gary Burton, my good friend, who remembers things about my show that I can't remember myself. He's adamant it was Sutton. And he's right, it was. I went to Sutton Prison and visited a restaurant that was being run in order to train prisoners in hospitality skills so that they could take up jobs in the hospitality sector when they left. And I am completely, for the record, in favour of that. But if Mel Stride's solution to gaping chasms in our hospitality workforce is prisoners, then I think he probably needs to go back to the drawing board. 11:49 is the time. I may take another call or two on the question of what it's like to be a migrant worker in a country where the government is dedicated to attacking migrant workers and essentially establishing the sense that they are not welcome here. But Natasha Clark has joined me a little early this week for PMQs because, judging by the provenance of some of the rumour spreaders, we should take a little more seriously than we usually do the rumours.
Good afternoon. Not afternoon. Good morning, James. Yes, Westminster has gone into a bit of an overdrive this morning about the potential that the Prime Minister could call an early, so it's not an early general election, is it? Could call a general election today or tomorrow.
Now, I'm told that one of my protégés upstairs, a 19-year-old dude, brought this information to you yesterday.
Via me, yes.
Yes. And that you didn't greet it.
I said that they could have to resign if he's correct and I'm not.
We're a huge fan of
we love
of said 19-year-old. But if he's right about this, I'm going to carry him through the offices on my shoulders.
That's completely fair enough, really, isn't it? That's completely fair enough. Yeah, we poo-pooed it all yesterday, saying yeah, right.
Well, here's one thing. So I've seen Tim Shipman, who we both know well, saying that he would be on the phone, as of course would you. But the people he would normally expect to poo-poo to scotch these rumours are staying silent. So read into that what you will. But Lucy Fisher earlier this week of the FT, of course, she pointed out perhaps more pertinently that there were meetings on Monday to talk about the fundraising financials in the event of a snap election, and that prompted the rumours. But 3 days ago, she reported that Tory officials were dismissing the significance of these conversations and pointing out that they were already scheduled board and finance meetings, so it's possible that people have added 2 and 2 together and come up with 5.
Look, we are in a bit of a feverish mood in Westminster at the moment because we are waiting for that election to be called at some point within the next few months. So everybody is reading into everything that happens with more seriousness than they usually would do. Now, for what it's worth, yes, Number 10 have been completely silent with me and seemingly all other reporters this morning. The Telegraph are reporting that they've put it to Number 10 that there could be an election called and they've got no response. And the BBC have put to them that there could be a reshuffle. They've got no response. It doesn't make sense for Number 10 to be essentially going to ground, going into the bunker, not talking to journalists, not saying anything, not slapping down any speculation if there's not something coming. So look, what could it be? Could it be a snap election? Obviously, we've had the ins and outs of this debate that have been going on in the country, but also in Downing Street. There are some people that want the Prime Minister to go to the country over the summer. They think that things are not going to get better. And on the back of quite good economic news, the inflation figures down, migration statistics, whether you like them or not, that's what the Conservatives want to say. They are pushing the numbers down. Yes, fewer nurses and fewer.
Great election platform. What do we want? Fewer doctors. When do we want them?
Fewer
last year.
And fewer dependents as well.
Down with children.
Well. Down with that. We don't want
down with children as well.
Exactly.
Damn them and wives. And I mean, crikey, who do these people think they are? Expecting to be able to bring their loved ones with them when they come here to wipe the bottoms of our old people or treat our diseased population. I wonder how many people in South Devon. Anyway, I digress slightly. You're being very non-committal.
Because I'm not sure I believe that there's going to be a reshuffle or an election. Why would you call an election today? Firstly, it's tipping it down with rain. It's not very sunlit.
I've got a reason for you.
Go on.
If we are still in the Euros, it would be the quarterfinals on the 5th or the 6th of July.
Ooh.
So the 4th of July, arguably, would be buying into... I mean, of course, we could be out. We could be on our way home by then, but that's a very silly and
people do feel more,
trivial issue. But it does generally whip up a bit of national something.
It does. Show of support after a big national sporting event like the Euros would probably put people in a good mood. But I just think if you're the Prime Minister and you're going to go into the election saying that things are going to get better on the economy, you need to wait for people to start to actually feel it in their pockets. And that's not going to happen for another couple of months, at all.
Why would there be noises from the 1922 committee if he did call it an election, as a couple of commentators are suggesting? Because they're just cross about the mess. Someone's comparing it. Gordon Brown was the last one to do a sort of I'm sure you're familiar with the mock turtle, the song of the mock turtle in Lewis Carroll. Will he, won't he? Will
yes,
he, won't he? Will he, won't he?
Exactly.
Will he join the dance?
And the argument for going now is that things aren't going to get any better, that the economy isn't going to pick up, and that you may as well go now, and you may as well call an election while you're on a slight front foot with slightly better than expected economic news, migration figures on the down, hopefully ahead of a summer of small boat crossings when you're expecting to get those flights off to Rwanda, which he believes is something that Tory voters or former Tory voters will want to vote for him for.
What a time to be alive. Thank
That's
God
the
everything
argument.
else is going so swimmingly, especially in South Devon. We should turn our attention to PMQs. What are the odds on a defection today? As my texter, who's done this, Ryri's just been in touch to say it'd be a cracking day for a defection.
That would be a good day.
I love how our PMQs exchanges are now sort of whipping up a spectator element of excitement. It'd be a cracking day for a defection, James, because we thought we might go 3 for 3 last week, and of course we didn't. But it would be a cracking day for a defection.
And as lots of people pointed out, they've already had 3. Just
Yes.
one was a lot before the other 2. But look, no rumours, Westminster rumours swirling about a
But they weren't
a
last
defection.
time. There were no
They
rumours
weren't.
about Natalie What's-her-chops, were
No,
there?
they weren't, because she was the most unlikely person to cross the floor. So anything's possible. But I doesn't feel like there is the mood in the air for one this week. But hey, we wait and see.
Before we speculate about what might come up, but a final word on the speculation about something else that might come up. If he did call an election today, how would it happen and when would he do it? It wouldn't happen during PMQs, would it?
I mean, I don't recall an instant where a Prime Minister has called something like that during Prime Minister's questions, so I don't know if he can do that. Usually it happens, as we know, with Prime Ministers making big resignation speeches, they roll out the podium in front of number 10 Downing Street and make a statement outside in the street. Could that happen today? Look, we've got a cabinet meeting later this afternoon, which again has increased the speculation that something could be happening because...
And ministers haven't been told what it's about.
Well, it usually happens on a Tuesday, but the Prime Minister was in Vienna yesterday on a trip, so
Vienna.
That's why they've just popped it back.
So it could all be
is that the
business as
case?
usual, in which case it becomes a crisis of communication in a way, because we shouldn't be sitting here. And we're very, very, what's the word I'm looking for? Sober, you and me, aren't we, Natasha? We're very sober and grown up. And yet we are discussing febrile rumour mills, which is a very bad sign of news management.
It is, and if there was no such thing happening later this afternoon, then you would really think that number 10 would come out and squash such speculation. But yes,
do you know what I
they
might
absolutely
do?
haven't.
I might catch up with Andrew Marr, who's been doing this for much longer than you or me.
I think it's a good shout, yeah. Ask him when the last time someone called a snap election in this way was.
We'll do that just before 12:30, I think. So stand by for the master. Before that, what do you think Keir Starmer will open with today?
Well, I was thinking about this earlier today.
Good,
and,
thank you for that.
the front page of the Times, which I'm sure you've got in front of you, gives
This
you
is the prisons and the
quite-
police.
prisons and the police, but also that memo that was on the front page, the strap story on the Times about Johnny Mercer.
This isn't fair because people won't know why we're laughing. But
No.
where do you begin?
Where do you begin?
With that story? I begin at the bottom. He didn't have any socks on.
I just don't think it should be appropriate for anyone, let alone a government minister, to be able to take their not just shoes off, but socks off on a train. Johnny Mercer, what were you thinking? So essentially Johnny Mercer has been snapped on a train writing a memo. Not quite sure who that memo was meant to be
Downing
to.
Street, it said, didn't it? It was to Downing
Sure.
Street. And in it he was saying, you've got to give more attention to people like Kemi Badenoch than to Rishi Sunak. And also, the really embarrassing bit was that the reason why the military veterans didn't have ID was because Downing Street was worried that if they gave them to the military veterans, they'd have to give them to the students, which is profoundly undemocratic. But more
it's not
importantly,
quite the government line, is
why
it?
was Johnny Mercer sitting in first class on a train without any shoes and socks on?
I don't know. I have not asked him, but maybe we should try and ask. We should try and
So they
see
could
what
go
Earth
in
was
on that,
thinking.
on
I think it's a
on
good
any of that, actually.
Yeah, I think it's a good example of what
Chaos.
Keir Starmer, exactly, chaos at the heart of government. Keir Starmer has repeatedly tried to exploit splits within the Conservative Party. He's very good at doing that. Equally, the other front page story on the Times about, like you say, about prisons and arrests and the police telling people to arrest fewer people. Keir Starmer repeatedly going on the justice system, how he feels that it's broken, how he feels there are plenty of problems in it. That gives him a very strong line of attack against the accusation, the Conservative Party traditionally have been the party of law and order. No more, says Sir Keir Starmer.
Yes. That's one option.
Of course, we had the infected blood compensation announcement yesterday
They're
as well.
all a bit culpable. There's a bit more Tory blame than Labour blame, but successive Labour governments didn't do enough either.
Sure.
Ken Clarke probably coming out worse from this, but Ken Clarke is probably closer to elements of the current Labour Party than he is to elements of the current Conservative Party, certainly on matters European.
He's still a Conservative member of the House
yes.
of Lords, however. So, take that from what you will. But more so that I might expect Keir Starmer to pick some holes in the current compensation scheme and say, look, why did the Prime Minister take so long to announce this compensation scheme? The chair of the inquiry, Sir Brian Langsdorff, said repeatedly that he wanted the Prime Minister to set up that compensation scheme before the end of the inquiry, and he repeatedly refused to do so.
Why did he repeatedly refuse to do so? Because he thought that the inquiry might end before he was out of Downing Street?
The government line was just, we're going to wait until the end of the inquiry to do it. No real rhyme or reason to say, but they wanted to wait for the inquiry to conclude before doing so. But, as we know, sadly, 2 people dying every week still as a result of infected blood. And there are many people who, time is of the essence, and they're not going to receive their compensation before they die.
I think this is a strong suggestion, actually. And even the last bit that you've said was, what Starmer could say, was he hoping that more people would die before the compensation had to be paid? I mean, there's all sorts of ways in on this, but Wagstaff has emerged with quite a heroic status, a standing ovation from
it was
survivors.
Absolutely
never seen
stunning.
anything like
I've
it.
never seen an inquiry chair get the reception that he got.
So to jump on that for Starmer by saying, why didn't you listen to this man that everybody is currently praising to the rooftops, puts Sunak in potentially quite a difficult
he's
position.
clearly got the trust of the victims of this scandal.
Yes,
he clearly has
exactly
been listening to them. We're just seeing Craig McKinley, the Tory MP, back in the Commons for the first time since he was off. He's sadly lost both his arms and legs to sepsis.
It's a horrific story, and quite rightly receiving a standing ovation as he arrives in the House with his prosthetic limbs, all 4 limbs.
Yeah, good for him.
Amputated as a consequence of sepsis. A reminder sometimes that there is a lot more to heaven and earth than is dreamt of in our politics. I also need to remind you that this is the point in the week where it's very, very, very powerful scenes, actually, very moving scenes as Craig McKinley makes his way into the chamber. Did you know about this? Did you know the extent of his injuries? I had no idea.
Yeah, we did.
His illness.
We did sort of behind the scenes know about that, but obviously, not something that most people like to speculate about when someone's, in the public domain, when he hadn't come out to speak about it. We knew he had sepsis and was very ill in hospital. I don't think until a good few months ago. I mean, there was honestly, the prognosis for him at one point was so bad that they thought he might lose his life.
Is that right?
So the fact that he's able to come in and, come back to work and he is intending to fight the next election, it's a pretty amazing show of strength, really, that he's managed to come back from it. So, yeah.
We will, of course, cross live to the House of Commons as soon as Sir Keir Starmer gets to his feet, which we expect to happen imminently. Other news around today, of course, involves the former CEO of the Post Office, Paula Vennells, an ordained priest, I keep having to remind myself, giving her first oral evidence on the Horizon IT scandal. More on that throughout the day. And the question, I mean, given such a cavalcade of news, the question of why Johnny Mercer was sitting in first class on a train not wearing any shoes and socks will perhaps never be answered, Natasha Clark.
Shall I just give him a little text?
Could see why wouldn't you? Well, it's quite nice though. If you've got clean feet and neatly trimmed,
were they clean?
I don't know, but if you've got manky old feet,
we need to find the people that are on this train.
Nice clean feet.
Could you smell them if you were sat opposite him?
The first thing you should do when you get off an aeroplane, when you arrive somewhere, if you want to minimise jet lag, is to take off your shoes and socks and scrunch your feet on a carpet. Just get that. I don't know why, but it helps.
Where did you learn that?
Plain school. Plain school. It's a definite thing, and I tried it, and it helps. It just reminds you that you're no longer in the air anymore.
Are you a compression sock kind of guy?
Grounds you. I think you should always be careful. But in first class on a train, on a single seat, I could mount a defence of Johnny Mercer's decisions as long as his feet were clean and his toenails were neatly trimmed. You can tell probably by the amount of toenail-related content that I'm currently sharing on the programme that we're waiting for the PMQs to begin in earnest, and that will happen. It's in Die Hard. It's in Die Hard that it teaches you about the feet. Yeah, there you go. Thank you.
Didn't know that. I'm a big Die Hard fan. I've forgotten that detail.
He was also wearing shorts. So shorts, no shoes.
There's nothing wrong with shorts.
And no socks. Yeah, for a serving MP in public.
What? You're saying that the serving MP in public should not be able to wear shorts?
I don't know that I think certainly my father wouldn't have.
We're in an era of climate
never left
change.
the home without wearing a tie.
What about when they're in 40-degree weather?
True. 3 minutes after
12 is the time. Prime Minister's questions on the way. We've had a look at, or is it Crocodile Dundee? I'm getting confused now.
I don't remember this being a part of Die Hard.
All right, maybe it was Crocodile Dundee.
Okay,
So we've covered the speculation about the possible election being called today. We've looked at some of the things that may come up to and including this extraordinary story on the front of the Times about Johnny Mercer being photographed. We probably haven't given enough detail because we both presume each other knows it. Someone took a picture of his laptop screen from behind him and read on the screen the full details of his memo accusing the Downing Street operation of spending too much time focusing on Rishi Sunak and not enough focusing on Kemi Badenoch. But anyway, here is Sir Keir Starmer.
I want to begin by saying a few words to the Honourable Member for Thanet South. Firstly, thank you for meeting me privately this morning with your wife and daughter so I could personally convey my best wishes to all of you. Yeah. Secondly, on some occasions, and there aren't many, this House genuinely comes together as one, and we do so today to pay tribute to your courage and determination in not only coming through an awful ordeal, but by being here today with us in this chamber. Yeah. And thirdly, I want to acknowledge your deep sense of service. I think politics is about service. And resuming your duties as an MP, being here today, shows us it's an example for all of us of your deep sense of service. And we thank you for it. Yeah. I also welcome Figan Murray, who is up in the gallery. She lost her son, Martin, 7 years ago today in the Manchester Arena attacks, and we remember everybody who was lost in that awful attack. She's campaigning for Martin's Law, which we must make a reality as soon as possible. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, the infected blood scandal reflects a profound failure across almost every part of the British state. Yeah. On Monday in our apologies and yesterday on the question of compensation, this House was united. But too many times we've heard similar sentiments from that dispatch box and from this one. There are many hard yards to go. So does the Prime Minister agree with me that we will only now make real progress if we finally tackle the lack of openness, transparency and candour that Sir Brian Langstaff identified as having prolonged the victims' suffering for decades?
Yeah. Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. The inquiry was established to get to the truth and provide answers, and this week's report represented a hugely significant moment for the community. This was an appalling scandal, and I think the whole House is grateful to the diligent work of all those who have supported Sir Brian Langstaff and the inquiry's work. And I also pay tribute to the bravery of every individual who has come forward and told their story in their fight for justice. Their voices have now finally been heard, and I agree with the honourable gentleman. We will listen to them and ensure that nothing like this can ever happen in our country again.
Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The infected blood scandal is shocking, truly shocking, but it's not unique. The story is familiar. Concerns raised but ignored, reports written but not acted on, victims and their families campaigning for years just to be heard. So I want to focus in, if I may, on the duty of candour, or lack of it, which has been a failing in scandal after scandal, injustice after injustice, from Grenfell to Horizon, Hillsborough, and now infected blood. And I've read the government has called for evidence about the duty of candour in health, but I can't think of a single example where that duty of candour should not apply to all public servants across the board. And I don't think it's possible for any of us to stand at these dispatch boxes and honestly say, never again, unless we address it. So does the Prime Minister agree that the time has now come for the duty of candour to be clearly enshrined in law across the board?
Mr. Speaker, I am, of course, aware of the recommendation made by Sir Brian Langstaff in the final report of the inquiry in relation to duties of candour and accountability, and indeed my honourable friend previously introduced the duty of candour into the health service. It is important that the government takes time to fully digest the gravity of the findings of the report The wrongs which have been committed are devastating and life-altering for so many. Ensuring that nothing like this ever happens again is a priority, and of course we are sympathetic to that and going through the recommendations in detail at the moment before providing a comprehensive response. But of course, given the situation and the gravity of the findings, it's a recommendation that there is an enormous amount of sympathy for.
Kirsten.
Thank you. I understand the Prime Minister wants to look at the recommendations in detail and to come back to them in due course, but we can't look away on this duty of candour. So can I at least ask the Prime Minister to expand the call for evidence on the duty of candour beyond health? We do owe that to the victims of Hillsborough and Horizon, and to work across the House to establish a far-reaching and binding duty of candour just as quickly as possible.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think the honourable gentleman will remember on Monday I said very specifically that the patterns and behaviour that we had seen in this appalling tragedy have been replicated in others, and I mentioned Hillsborough specifically. So I'm very aware that there are structural and behavioural cultural problems that we do need to fix. The duty of candour is something that, as I said, the principle, and there is an enormous amount of support for the principle of and sympathy for. He will understand we are digesting the full contents of the report, but of course we want to right the wrongs of the past and crucially ensure that nothing like this happens ever again.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In his report, Sir Brian identified individual failures, a number of them, even cover-ups. But alongside that, he also found equally important and harder to reach institutional and cultural failings, including in the NHS. A defensive attitude which refused to acknowledge problems, the silencing of those who raised concerns, and a total failure of leadership when faced with the truth. Now, the NHS does a remarkable job every day, but that is indefensible. Does the Prime Minister agree that the very culture of the NHS needs to change?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and again, I think in response specifically to the question from our honourable friend, the member for Bromsgrove, we discussed this on Monday, and the NHS, of course, provides life-saving care to so many people every single day, for which we're enormously grateful. But it is absolutely clear, as the report makes crystal clear, that there were significant failings. The NHS failed. It failed people, it let them down. It's right that they are held accountable for that and learn the lessons. Now, there clearly have been improvements and changes in medical practice since that time, but going forward, we need to go through the full recommendations of Sir Brian Langstaff's report and hold the NHS to account for bringing through the changes that are necessary.
We need reform, we need change, and I've seen firsthand how important reform is during my time running the Crown Prosecution Service. But I also saw how hard it is, particularly on cultural issues. It requires brave decisions and difficult decisions. Now, 11 years ago, the Health Secretary, the now Chancellor said, the era of gagging NHS staff from raising their worries about patient care must come to an end. But 11 years on and 10 months on from the Lucy Letby case, there are still clear examples of NHS managers still gagging staff and then being moved on instead of being moved out. So will the Prime Minister now commit to ensuring that those who do gag and silence whistleblowers will no longer be able to work in the NHS?
Prime Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, of course the behaviour that the honourable gentleman describes is wrong and I believe already is illegal under our laws, but we will make sure that people do have the ability to raise concerns. And one thing that I know has given many of those who have been impacted by this scandal some reassurance is the appointment of Sir Robert Francis to be chair of the inquiry, who obviously is someone who not just has a wealth of experience dealing with this particular set of issues, but has a long track record of working with the NHS as well on the issues that the honourable gentleman raises.
Sir Brian's report is a victory for all those campaigners and victims who fought so hard for this moment, including the Right Honourable Member for Hull North. But it's also one of profound pain, anger and sadness for so many. Now, there is a chance for us to make real progress on this issue, and we must do that with victims in mind. Now, given the degree of cross-party consensus that we've already seen on apologies and compensation, and given the government's promise to ensure compensation by the end of the year, will he also now promise to deliver on all the recommendations in the same timeframe by the end of the year?
Yeah. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, of course, we want to deliver on the recommendations as quickly as practically possible, and indeed our expectation is that we can do that before the end of the year. But Sir Robert's appointment, as I said, will bring a wealth of experience, and it was crucial that the Chair had the knowledge and the expertise and familiarity with the issues here. His support for delivering the scheme and making sure that compensation can be paid by the end of the year, I think, will be invaluable. He talked about the community, and over the next few weeks, Sir Robert will seek views from the infected blood community, specifically on the proposed scheme, to make sure that the scheme will best serve those it is intended for. And our shared priority is delivering compensation to all those infected and affected with absolutely minimum delay, and begin bringing justice to all of those impacted.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in 1997, the public voted in what they were told would be a sort of continuity Conservative government, the same policies, just with different faces. Instead, what they got was record immigration, constitutional vandalism, and a broken economy. Does the Prime Minister agree that with the economy now roaring back to life under a Conservative government, the last thing we need is a return to the failed Labour recipe of high taxes, open borders, and employment laws that destroy jobs?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend gives a superb and passionate economic diagnosis, and he's right. Inflation is now back to normal, and indeed lower than France, Germany, the United States, at its lowest level in years. Our economy is growing faster, wages are rising, and that's why we need to stick to the plan that is working, Mr. Speaker. And he's right to point out the risks of what the Labour Party proposed. 70 new laws. They've caved in to their union paymasters, and what does that mean? It means it will cost jobs and damage our economic recovery.
MP Leader Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I begin by also welcoming the member from South Thanet back to the chamber. He is indeed an inspiration to all of us. Mr. Speaker, speculation is rife, so I think the public deserve a clear answer to a simple question. Does the Prime Minister intend to call a summer general election, or is he feared?
Mr. Speaker, as I have said repeatedly to him, there is, Mr. Speaker, spoiler alert, there is going to be a general election in the second half of this year, and at that moment the British people will in fact see the truth about the honourable gentleman opposite me, because that will be the choice at the next election, Mr. Speaker. A party that is not able to say to the country what they would do, a party that would put at risk our hard-earned economic stability, or the Conservatives that are delivering a secure future for our United Kingdom.
Mr. Speaker, he continues to play games with the public, but whilst he does that, let's get back to some serious matters. Because I was taken aback this week when a former Prime Minister spoke some sense. Alas, it was indeed David Cameron, because what he said was that in relation to graduate route visas, if any restrictions are implemented, it will lead to job losses, it will lead to university closures, it will lead to a reduction in research. And University Scotland's outlines £5 billion of economic value at risk. So can I ask the Prime Minister, does he agree with the Foreign Secretary?
The Foreign Secretary also said that the levels of legal migration to this country are too high, Mr. Speaker, and that's what I believe also, which is why it is right that we are taking decisive action to bring the numbers down. And, Mr. Speaker, that plan is working. In the first 3 months of this year, the visas issued are down by 25%, Mr. Speaker. Migration is on its way to being returned to more sustainable levels, and I appreciate that is a point of difference between the Honourable Gentleman's Party and indeed the Labour Party and us. We believe that level of migration needs to come down to more sustainable levels, so we ease the pressure on public services, and everyone who comes to our country must indeed contribute economically. That's the migration system we will deliver.
Simon Bain. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the Welsh borders, we're incredibly proud.
18 minutes after 12, and a curious PMQs, which we will explore a little later. On the subject of a snap election, I've got the numbers in front of me of where the government's net approval ratings lie on a variety of issues. I shall share those with you after this. It is 21 minutes after 11. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Andrew Marr joining me shortly just to cast his seasoned eye over the rumour mill that even Stephen Flynn, the leader in Westminster of the SNP, contributed to during PMQs. Before that, Natasha Clark is here for probably a shorter than usual post-match analysis because it was a curiously flat and uncombative PMQs today.
It was, and I think, the tone was set by the Conservative MP Craig McKinley walking in and getting that standing ovation at the very start of Prime Minister's questions after he's been off sick for so long with sepsis, but now returning to work. So both Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak paying tribute to his incredible resilience after his life-threatening episode of sepsis. Keir Starmer then, as we discussed, went in to talk about the infected blood scandal, but didn't really probe, I think, the Prime Minister and skewer him. He tried to keep it, I think, the tone quite prime ministerial, as you said, and to keep it sort of quite collegiate. He said that the House was united on that compensation announcement for those. He did say that there are many hard yards to go and sort of challenged the Prime Minister to make progress and that time is of the essence. And he asked him if progress can only be made if we tackle the lack of openness and candour which has prolonged victims' suffering for decades. I think what was particularly powerful about what he said was when he was talking and comparing it to the wider issue of trust in our government institutions, in the NHS, talking about other scandals that we've seen. He said it's not an isolated incident, this sort of scandal, and people will rightly, look at this and go, actually, well, so many other things, Grenfell, Mid-Staffs, Lucy Letby, whatever you'd like to look at, Sarah Everard, public trust in our institutions is at an all-time low, and it's easy to see why when you look at some of the harrowing details of that infected blood report.
Windrush or Grief Hillsborough, I think, most obviously.
Of course, yeah.
I thought the gloves were going to come off, and the second question, they didn't come off. Third question, they didn't come off. Fourth question. By the fourth question, I thought, I wonder. I mean, there's always a chance, and we should acknowledge that it's an entirely sincere response to a news story that has broken this week after being decades in the making. And he just felt that this was the correct approach. But, we're out of a job if we don't look for optics or reasonings and plans. I think it was about ownership. I think that we come out of that PMQs thinking that Keir Starmer is somehow in charge of the response to the infected blood inquiry, and that Rishi Sunak was the one playing catch-up. And if that was deliberate, I think it worked.
Yeah, I think that the tone that he struck was really marked, but it did work. But also, let's not forget that this could potentially be a little bit more self-interested than we're expecting, because if Keir Starmer is Prime Minister in a few months' time, he's the one that's going to have to push this infected blood compensation scheme through. Maybe he doesn't want to pick too many holes in a scheme that he might be having to implement in just a few months' time. That could potentially be it. But obviously it's such a issue that's really captured Westminster this week. I think going in with that sort of sombre tone and slightly, he had a critical eye of it, didn't he? He didn't, sit back and let the Prime Minister have it as a win, but wanted to do so in the tone that he did it today, and I think it did work.
Well, I shall read you two conflicting texts just in conclusion. The first is from Niall in Derry, who said, Starmer went in with class and dignity and Sunak decided to spend the rest of his time mudslinging. I think, to be fair, the mudslinging came later. Was that Danny Kruger who
that was
stood up?
Yeah, the Conservative MP went very
excitable,
very
isn't he?
excited. I don't think it came from the Prime Minister this week.
I agree with you there. Matt in Wrexham, conversely, says it seems a lot easier to take Rishi Sunak seriously when he's not trying to be funny or shouting out like a petulant child. Is this a new tactic? Again, I disagree with that because I think the tactics were set by Keir Starmer this week, not by Rishi Sunak. And finally, from Andrew in Liverpool, please no election yet. I've been telling my son that this will be the first one he'll ever be able to vote in, and he's not 18 until the 17th of July, so please leave it for at least a couple more weeks.
Well, if the election rumour mill is true, which I don't think it is, by the way.
Well, you've stated your case. Let's turn our attention, let's go next on that subject to Andrew Marr, with you, of course, on LBC at 6 o'clock tonight. But crucially, ferreting, squirreling, what's the correct verb to describe your activities around Westminster in the last hour or so, Andrew?
lurking in a slightly seedy manner, I would say. A seedy lurk.
What have you gleaned? What have you gleaned?
And I have been seedily lurking, since all the way through this Parliament, and I have not come across a morning like this one for election speculation. It is at a different level entirely. It is shared by all the senior journalists, an awful lot of senior MPs from both the major parties and indeed the SNP. Everybody thinks something is going on. Now, there's very, very little hard evidence for this, but just to give you an example, I've spoken to a cabinet minister who thinks it's not going to happen, but really isn't sure and doesn't quite know what cabinet is being called to talk about, but points out the King is in London and Rishi Sunak is going to be seeing him later today. I've talked to somebody absolutely at the heart of Conservative Party election planning and the operation there, and I said yes or no. And he smiled at me, shook his head and walked on. And I was quite surprised by that. Something's happening. So here's a third theory about Prime Minister's questions, James, which is that if you're Keir Starmer and you go into the chamber and you think the man opposite me, Rishi Sunak, is about to call the general election on the basis of very good, better economic news today, you don't give him the chance for that platform. You keep everything quiet, you keep everything calm. And Keir Starmer was at his most, as it were, father of the nation. Yeah. He spoke much longer about Craig McKinley and pointed out that he'd met Craig McKinley, who was a right-wing Brexit Tory MP, and he was all above politics, as it were. I'm the person who speaks for the country. I'm not going to let you have your election platform. And it was only that moment with Danny Kruger that gave that to the Prime Minister. So I think that was what was going on. He's saying that we just don't know what's going to happen later on today.
So
but
Craig McKinley, as you say, former UKIP candidate. So lots of significance there. And denying Rishi Sunak the vaguest opportunity for a lap of honour would add to the idea that there are
precisely
things afoot this afternoon.
But for what it's
worth,
I
just say one other thing. Sorry to jump in there, and then I'll belt up. But one other thing, which I think is significant, is that interest rates are not likely to come down, I think, early this summer. And a lot of people think that inflation is going to tick back up again, not enormously, but a bit. In which case, today might well be the best day for economic news the government is going to have before the general election.
Well, it's not brilliant, though,
on a day
it,
like this, sorry?
It's not brilliant economic news, though, is it, Andrew? It's less than the government thought. They thought it was going to be 1.9%. The economy's still not growing as much as we thought it was going to be.
I didn't say brilliant, I said the best they're going to get. And that being so, it would be a really bad act of political or party management to blow that news aside with election speculation, would it not? In other words, the government could have stamped on this already really hard, and they have chosen, wisely or unwisely, I would say unwisely not to. So either this is going to happen, or they have kind of slightly ruined what was going to be a good day for them.
So election, this is what the meeting this afternoon will be, or reshuffle, or, not for the first time, a complete red herring, and he'll come out with another announcement about bin collections or compulsory maths or something like that, which he tends to treat with a lot more fanfare than anybody else does.
Could this not be a speech where he just hails the economic news from today and says, yes, the plan is working, we've got to carry on and get on with it?
But then why not scotch the rumours? This is the point Andrew's picking up on.
Totally
it would be so easy to say, no, nothing to see here, move along, stop being so silly. And no one's done that, Andrew, to be clear.
No one's done that. And he said again in answer to Stephen Flynn in the Commons that it was going to be, spoiler alert, in the second half of the year, which means we're not going to have a June election, but that does not rule out a July one.
No,
I think it's a very weird time, by the way, to have an election. You know, you've got the football on, you've got a lot of sport, a lot of people booking their holidays already. It would not go down very well with quite a lot of voters.
Would I be fair in saying that you seem to be about 52-48 in favour of some big announcement, election-flavoured announcement later this afternoon?
Completely unfair, James. I'm 51.7.
Of course you are.
58.3.
Andrew,
the infernal ratio.
Andrew, can I just ask you, what did it feel like when, sort of 2009, when Gordon Brown was umming and ahhing about this? Did you feel there were any comparisons to this now?
I can point out that Gordon Brown eventually had to do an interview with one Andrew Marr to say there wasn't going to be an election.
Yeah.
And that, of course, proved to be the wrong choice. But I can vividly remember being summoned into Number 10 to be given that interview by Gordon Brown saying, I'm not going to call a general election, and looking from the window of Number 10 down into Downing Street and seeing an absolutely furious Adam Bolton of Sky News pacing up and down, wondering why he hadn't got the interview. So I remember that day with great affection. Sorry, Adam. madam.
Thank you, Andrew. Andrew Marr with you back on LBC, by which time he will almost certainly have seedily gleaned even more top info at 6 o'clock this evening, and indeed to that. And I'm sure Natasha will be popping up again in the course of this afternoon. It's a brilliant question about Gordon Brown. I should have thought of that myself.
It's all right. I can. If you decide you don't want to do Prime Minister's questions anymore, James, you just let me know.
No chance. No chance. Amelia Cox has your headlines. It is 26 minutes to 1, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I know this is a little bit self-referential, but the difference between news and conversations we can have together is sometimes quite acute. There is a heck of a lot of news around this week, but there are not that many stories that lend themselves to our sort of phone-in format, to our conversations together. But I want to, for the rest of today's programme, have a look at three stories that certainly demand more attention, and for me at least, you might be across all the facts, but for me at least, rather more explanation than we've provided so far. We will begin with the requests for arrest warrants issued by the senior prosecutor at the International Criminal Court for 2 Israeli leaders and 3 leaders of Hamas. Responses around the world really markedly different, including from countries that would ordinarily be singing from the same, if not at least similar, hymn sheets. Chris Stephen is a war correspondent who has covered 9 wars, primarily for The Guardian, but the title of his latest book explains why he's here today. It is, and was published in February, and it's called The Future of War Crimes Justice. And Chris Stephen joins me now. Chris, thank you. Can we begin with what you found surprising about Karim Khan's intervention earlier this week?
Yeah, the surprise for me wasn't so much the charges, but the fact that he announced them before they go to the judges. Because in every other ICC case, you put your stuff to the judges, they have a think about it, and then if they agree, they issue an indictment, because a prosecutor themselves can't issue the indictment. But what Khan has done is jump the gun. He said, look, this is what I'm going to be pushing for. And he's made it public. So in a way, he's antagonizing the judges, because he's saying to them, look, you better agree to all this, because if you don't, or any bits you don't agree to, you're going to get all this pressure from me.
Which means that he feared if he had gone down the normal route, then he wouldn't have got what he wanted.
Yeah, presumably. That's the only thing you can think of. There's no other reason for him. He even he did a thing with CNN and with Financial Times. So he's really pushed it up. So I suppose, yes, he's thinking maybe they'll water it down, and then I'm in trouble because this is what I want.
And of course, the public pressure then is exerted, whether directly or obliquely, upon the judges, even though the public probably don't even know the names of the judges concerned.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. It's a fairly low-key thing normally in every other war, but this one's different.
You had some dealings with him, I think, when he was one of the defense lawyers working on the trial of the former Serbian president, Slobodan Milosevic. Is that part of the reason why you were a little surprised at the tactics he adopted this week? Because he didn't seem to be that sort of character.
Yeah, because he's an immense lawyer, and that's why if you want an objective opinion, you probably go elsewhere. But he helped me a lot with my first book, and then I got to know him as well later when I was Libya correspondent for The Guardian, and he was trying to get Saif Gaddafi off because Saif Gaddafi is charged with war crimes, and he was representing him. So I sort of talked to him quite a lot, and he's very bullish. That's for sure. But he really knows the rules, and in fact, he actually co-wrote one of the 2 law books used by all the war crimes courts. So he knows the rules inside out. So this one, it does seem a bit cavalier.
What view do you have on the situation that he has precipitated? Because I don't think there is any surprise in the response from Israel. Probably no surprise in the response from the White House or from the UK government. And yet his calculation must surely be that the momentum for the warrants to be issued would be increased by him adopting this approach.
Yeah, exactly. He's, to be fair to him, he was given this job and they said, go prosecute. And they said, one of the places you're looking at is Palestine. So then when this thing blew up, he has two choices. He can either sort of do the minimum and sort of delay, or he can go for broke. And he thinks, he doesn't have to be impartial. He's a prosecutor. He's a hunter. The judges, they're the ones who are impartial. And what he'd say, if you criticize an indictment, he'd say, great, come to court, give your defense. It's a trial, and then we'll see.
What do you think, as the author of The Future of War Crimes Justice, of the case that he's revealed so far, the allegations that he's sort of levelled at Netanyahu and Gallant?
Yeah,
sorry.
the most interesting thing about it, the thing that jumps out at you, is all this stuff that's on TV every day. None of that is part of the indictments. He's left all the battle stuff off the charge sheet. He's got two charges. For Hamas, it's October the 7th. And then for Israel, for Netanyahu, it's not the bombing and so on, it's the blockade. It's the denying of aid and so on. And he's done it for, quite a smart reason. He is a smart fox, which is that even though killing civilians is a war crime, it's not a war crime if there's military there. And Hamas, the way it operates, is it operates within civilian structures. And war law is actually pretty draconian on this. It says, look, it's not a hospital if there's a military site there. And I think a lot of people don't understand that. They think, well, then, you still can't bomb it. And war law says, no, you can bomb. You can bomb any military facility. Yes, you have to give civilians time to get out, and it has to be proportional to the military target. But it's actually pretty strict. And I think that's going to surprise a lot of people, that a lot of these airstrikes and whatnot, even though they've caused civilian casualties, that they'd be ruled okay in war law.
What does it do to the ICC? I know it's early days, but you've written that you don't think anyone's actually going to ever come before The Hague in this case, as indeed with Vladimir Putin's indictment last year. Is this enhancing or diluting the ICC's influence? And if you could, Chris, when you answer, bear in mind this narrative that says there's a widespread perception that it has so far only really sort of concerned itself with malfeasance in African countries, and that the moving of the spotlight towards Israel is unprecedented.
Yeah, so the thing about the ICC is it's not a United Nations organization, right? You think of it as a club. It's a club that you join. 124 nations have joined it. If you join the club, you're saying to them that we will follow the rules, and you can arbitrate on the rules, okay? Which means that if you attack somebody, or if anyone attacks you, the ICC can get involved, and that's why it can do Palestine. It can do Israel because Israeli forces are in Palestine. That's why it can do Russia for Ukraine, because Ukraine, although they haven't joined the ICC, they've given it authority, which comes to the same thing. And it's also why they can't do Syria, Iran, Iraq, because there's no ICC presence, because it's voluntary. And then the thing about Africa is it's like the Groucho Marx thing, where you wouldn't join a club that would have you as a member. No nation that commits war crimes is going to join an international court. So when they first started out, they looked around and they realized that the worst war zones on the planet were beyond the ICC, because basically it's all of Europe, it's almost all of South America, and it's most of Africa. So the ICC has always had this inbuilt problem, which is, people are only going to join if they don't think they're going to commit war crimes. So it looked, and it only had a handful of states, and they were all in Africa, which is why there were all these Africa inquiries, because its hands were tied elsewhere. And the other thing to remember about Africa is, I was there. I've been to Uganda, and I went to Sierra Leone, and then there's quite a few African courts going as well. And there's two very different responses. So the African leaders, a lot of them say, because you're only doing Africa, you should stop these inquiries or close the whole thing down. It's not fair. The African human rights groups say, no, keep the African inquiries, but you should also be doing other stuff. And that's the sort of split.
So if I don't think this would have been Karim Khan's intent, but if anywhere there was a sort of desire to increase the influence of the ICC by extending its interests beyond African countries, if I've understood you correctly, it could be backfiring, because this might end up diluting the ICC's influence on the broader world stage.
Yeah, I think it's exactly what you said. There were some lawyers in the ICC that when Palestine joined, they sort of thought, goody, for that reason, that we want some war zones to join, because that's what we're for. We're not, Denmark is a member, right? But they're not going to have, ethnic cleansing in Denmark. you have a court that might have nothing to do. So in that way, they were really pleased, and it has extended it. But I think also it's, as you say, it's going to dilute it, because at the end of the day, no one's coming to trial, just as Putin's not coming to trial, unless some bizarre thing happens. But neither Russia or Israel are a member of the court. They don't have to hand their people over.
But if a final question, if I mean, it limits their travel. If the warrants are issued, I know that the likelihood of Netanyahu still being in post is pretty slim. But he would find it very difficult to visit plenty of countries that are ostensibly allies of Israel.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing is it's a travel ban, although there are a couple of exceptions. I mean, one is South Africa, who set a precedent because they wouldn't arrest this genocide suspect, and there was no punishment. So actually, if you're an ICC member, you can have Netanyahu, and yes, technically you're breaking the law, but nothing's going to happen to you. And the other thing is they can sign these agreements, the Article 98, which I know Britain might be toying with, which is you sign an agreement with an outside country saying we won't arrest your citizens. And that's one of the weird things about ICC law that allows you to do that. And I think there may be a rush of Article 98 sort of in the near future.
Well, Chris Stephen, I am clearer about what has happened, but considerably less clearer about what is likely to happen next. So I thank you for that, I think. Definitely thank you for that. And Chris's latest book, The Future of War Crimes Justice, was published in February of this year. 12:45 is the time. 12:48 is the time. It's odd, isn't it? Paula Vennell's in front of the Post Office inquiry today. The infected blood inquiry obviously informing an awful lot of news coverage this week and reminders of other scandals, if you like, of public policy and cover-up, whether you're looking at some that have perhaps been have perhaps been resolved, if not satisfactorily for everybody, like Hillsborough, and some that haven't, like Windrush and Orgreave. But attention turns back to Grenfell today because some developments there that Fraser Knight is across.
James, we've been in a briefing with the Metropolitan Police. We're, of course, fast approaching the 7th anniversary of the Grenfell Tower fire. And with that, this year also, the publication of Phase 2 of the Grenfell Tower fire inquiry. Now, the Metropolitan Police and the Crown Prosecution Service have told us this morning that it will likely be the end of 2026 before we see any criminal charges being brought. This has been an incredibly lengthy investigation that's going on, but we now know there are 19 organisations and 58 individuals who are all being treated as suspects in this. But because of the scale of the investigation, the amount of evidence that's had to be gathered, the amount of witness statements that have had to be taken, and of course the public inquiry report coming out, which the police reckon they'll need to spend another year going through the details of that. It's adding delay after delay to what is already a hugely complex investigation. Now, Deputy Assistant Commissioner Stuart Cundy was telling me he understands the hurt that these delays will be causing for the bereaved families, but he says they need to get it right.
I've investigated many things in my time as a police officer, but never something on this scale and the complexity of it. And whilst I've been involved since the awful day on the 14th of June 2017, I cannot pretend to imagine what it is like for those who have been most affected. But we as the police, we owe it to those who lost their lives, to the bereaved and the survivors. I gave a commitment to the bereaved families and the survivors in 2017 that we would follow the evidence wherever it took us and we would do our jobs to the best possible standard, to the best of our abilities. We have one chance to get this investigation right.
But the Metropolitan Police saying that they do believe the fire was started as a result of a criminal act. Some of this potential
charges.
charges.
The fire spread as a result of a criminal act, not that it started.
That the fire spread as a result of that. But look, some of the charges that they're looking at are around gross negligence, manslaughter, corporate manslaughter, fraud, health and safety. There's a huge range of them. And one interesting fact as well in terms of the amount of evidence they have. Some of the files they've already prepared for prosecutors, they said if they printed them all off now, it would stand taller than Nelson's column in the middle of Trafalgar Square.
I don't know. We may catch up tomorrow with some of the families that we've been close to since this tragedy started, although, crikey, that
reminder of how long ago it was is quite sobering. I mean, 58 individuals and 19 companies identified as suspects who could face charges, and no guarantee that they all will, but families who feared that there wouldn't be an appetite for pursual and prosecution should perhaps derive some comfort from this.
I think so, and the police and prosecutors have said that they've been speaking very closely with the families throughout the whole process. They know about this timeline, and they too will want to make sure that if they do take this to court, even though it's 10 years after the tragedy likely before that happens, they'll want to make sure that the case is as watertight as it possibly can be. Also, interestingly, one of the potential crimes they're looking at is misconduct in a public office. Now, they wouldn't confirm, where at what level that is, but it could mean that we've got some, public servants who face criminal charges to come.
Do we have any idea of when names may be introduced to the mix?
We were told that would be once charges are brought. They wouldn't be drawn on who or which organisations are under investigation just now.
Fraser Knight, thank you very much indeed. And of course, that anniversary unfolds on the 14th of June when the 72 lives claimed by the fire as it ripped through the tower block. And just to clarify that conversation I had with Fraser, it's not the fact that a fire started that is under investigation, because that can happen in any home at any time. It's the extraordinary nature of the spread of the fire. The various explanations have been put forward for why that would have been, but that is what the investigation is looking at. And finally, Fraser, for my own clarification, so the police essentially wait for the report and then go through it with a fine-tooth comb, looking for evidential grounds for investigation and potentially prosecution.
New lines of inquiry will no doubt come out of that. Yeah, they have already taken some of the evidence from the inquiry and followed that up, but when they get that report, they need to go through it in detail.
Thank you, Fraser. Fraser Knight there, fresh from this briefing where it has been revealed by the Metropolitan Police at Scotland Yard that a total of 58 people and 19 companies have been identified as suspects who could face charges over the Grenfell fire disaster. Another story that I wanted to provide you with a little bit more detail on this week was something that unfolded in court yesterday. It was a case brought by Liberty, the Civil Liberties Organisation, who took the government to court over changes to public order law. Akiko Hart is the director of Liberty, and joins me now. Akiko, what were the changes to public order law that you were concerned about? And I appreciate this probably doesn't need a spoiler alert, but how did you get on?
Thanks so much, James. Thanks for inviting me on today. And, you cover such relentlessly grim news, including the piece you just covered. And we took the government to court and we won. And I hope that provides some level of comfort and hope for other people and groups out there who are doing the same thing. So essentially, our case was around protest. So the High Court yesterday ruled that a piece of anti-protest legislation that the Home Secretary had brought in was unlawful and undemocratic and should be scrapped. So what happened was last year, the then Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, brought in a law that gave the police powers, almost unlimited powers, to crack down on any protest that they deemed to be a more than minor disturbance, which effectively kind of dragged in swathes of protesters into the criminal justice system. But critically, she didn't have the power to do so because that specific law was rejected by Parliament a couple of months earlier. So that was what the ruling was. So I think it sends a really, really clear message to government that it has to operate within the law and that it can't pursue this kind of anti-protest agenda at the expense of our rights.
Because, I mean, we talked about it at the time and somewhat reluctantly because sometimes you don't want to believe things are true, however compelling the evidence may be that it might be. It appeared that Suella Braverman was seeking to introduce a situation in which she would be able to unleash the full force of the Metropolitan Police on protests that she personally didn't like. And that's not a million miles away from where the court ended up.
Yeah, it's not a million miles away at all. I mean, the judgment itself was, it is a protest story, but it's also a constitutional one because essentially, she used her power, her executive power, to push through something that that Parliament had rejected. So it was both, and that's what the judgment was really clear on.
So it's this notion of a more than minor disruption being too arbitrary, effectively, and being in the eye of the Home Secretary and consequently the police. Is that the end of it? Is that game over? Mission accomplished?
Oh, nearly. So, a couple of things. So the government are appealing. It should be an expedited judgment, but we're not sure yet. So we'll find out. But they're getting timed out, aren't they? Yes. So we will see them in court.
And final question. It hasn't actually, the period of time between Braverman making her move and you getting the case to court, nothing actually happened to prove the point, did it?
No, so what happened was hundreds of people have been arrested under this charge. In fact, Greta Thunberg was as well, except she was acquitted. So you've got all these people in the criminal justice system at the moment under this. So we're calling on the police to stop using this law, which has been deemed unlawful, and to pause all cases in the meantime.
There's something quite pertinent about the idea of Suella Braverman introducing an unlawful law. Akiko Hart, thank you very much indeed. Director of Liberty there, who, as you heard, took the government to court over changes to public order law and were successful. I quite liked Akiko's sort of contribution to the editorial tone of the programme by essentially saying, "Well, I bet you're glad I'm here because I've got some good news." You're not wrong in the current climate. That is it from me for today. If you missed any of today's show, do remember you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, the official LBC app, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Ben Kentish, who is standing in for Tom Swarbrick. But now, for 2 days running, I'm handing over to Sheila Fogarty, bang on time.
And in person, which is lovely.
Fantastic.
Listen, would you like another bit of election speculation?
Oh, go on.
Larissa Brown, defence editor of The Times, has just tweeted that Grant Shapps has had his travel plans affected by Cabinet this afternoon. They're meeting at 4 p.m, aren't they, the Cabinet?
Yeah.
The Defence Secretary has had to delay a trip to Eastern Europe to attend. The source speaking to Larissa said this is unusual as normally they get a pass not to attend in circumstances like this.
I suppose Michael Green can go on his behalf.
Yes, maybe he could. Or maybe someone of another name altogether. Thanks very much, James. 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 Thanks very